I'd like to thank you all for coming to the Whitman Middle School Building Committee meeting of August 28th. School will be in session real soon. As we start all meetings, if you could join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'd like to remind everyone that this meeting is being recorded for future broadcast on WHCA. The last forever.
Fred?
Yes.
I'd like to make a motion to take number 2 out of order and have it placed in front of number 1, because if that does not, if it is not rescinded, we do not need to hear options available and all that stuff. So I would like to make that motion.
I'm inclined to go into the order of the agenda so that everyone, I received many emails.
I'd like to second that. Good. Is that a motion?
Yeah, I motion.
I'd like a second, just so we can talk. If that's okay.
I'll allow the second for discussion, and that is to take item 2 out of order. Discussion?
Yeah, I'd like to discuss it. First of all, it is my suggestion, because to go through all that on part number 1, some of it would not be necessary if we don't rescind. We have seen the packets, if you have looked at them, as you should when you come to a meeting. And I just think it would be just a faster way of doing things. It doesn't mean that we aren't going to talk about how things are going to be bonded or how things are going to be done. And that is my reason.
Anybody else further discussion? Mr. Galvin?
Yeah, I'd be concerned about having that vote right off the bat without hearing what our other options are. I mean, if the MSBA has any limits on what we can do, and going through all of the discussions in number 1 is going to honestly sway my opinion either way on whether we rescind it or not. If we don't have all the options that we think we might have, and we rescind it now, or we don't rescind it, I mean, I think we need to have that discussion so that we all understand. I mean, some of these numbers in here are confusing. Numbers that we got 2 weeks ago were confusing. I prefer to keep it in.
Anybody else discussion? Justin?
I would just say, for what it's worth, in discussion for item 2, I would probably ask half of the questions that would probably be covered in item 1, so I know that it would be faster.
Anybody else? We'll take a vote. Should we, roll call vote, should we consider number 2 before number 1? And we will start down that end of the table. Crystal?
Yes.
Brandon?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
No.
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 No. Yes.
Yes.
No. Yes.
So,
Chris?
yes. Okay. Yes, 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 no, yes. No. Okay, so, hang on. 1, 2, 3.
Raise hands for no. How many said?
Yeah, how many said no? So 7 no's, and now yeses. We have Mr. Scriven is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 yeses. Okay, so we have voted to take this out of order. So it is now top of the agenda. Okay. Proceeding now. We will discuss rescinding the schematic design approval vote from August 15th And I certainly feel myself that we would have, how do I say it, a better understanding if we had been able to talk about number one. But, Mr. Carroll and AI3, what would it be if we rescinded the vote? What would we be looking at? What would we be looking at for some options as far as with MSBA, etc.?
So if you rescind the vote, I guess it depends ultimately if you vote for another course of action tonight. So the options would be to rescind the vote, to do a new vote, and allow us to continue on to submit our package this week on the 31st and go to the October 25th board meeting. Second option might be to delay and submit at a later date, which would mean we would potentially go to a later board meeting, either the next meeting in December or the meeting after that. That meeting after that has not been set yet. So we anticipate there could be one in January. I think, Troy, last year the first one was in March. Is that right? So if you went out 2 meetings, it could be as early as January, but it could be as late as March of '24 before the next meeting comes in, just based off of what they did last year. Other than that, I mean, those are really the 3 options I would say at hand is to move forward with the current schedule, to adjust to some level of delay to one meeting passed, or adjust 2 meetings passed. There's obviously further delays if the committee so desired, but those are really the options at hand.
Ms. Stafford?
Yes, I know that we requested information from our lawyer, and so about rescinding the vote, so George or Jeff, if you could speak to that too, because I think people need to know that part. What can and cannot be rescinded.
Yeah, while Jeff finds that information, I was just wondering, what's the genesis of why we're here today? I saw...
Because I've had a multitude of emails from many members of this committee questioning the way information was given to them, a little bit shell-shocked, some information missing, so that they could have a complete idea of all information so that they could make an intelligent decision.
So last week's vote was not intelligent?
Some people felt that they were a little bit shell-shocked and rushed.
But it was unanimous.
That is correct.
I just want to be clear. Thank you so much.
So I did include Fred on an email to our counsel, Andy Waugh, and his just about rescinding a vote. And hi, Jeff, Fred, Beth, and George. I've reviewed your correspondence below and Robert's Rules of Order, Rule 35 on rescinding a motion. I've also conferred with several attorneys in my office who serve as town council in a number of towns. Now, I think Andy confused school committee with building committee. In order to rescind an earlier motion, a member of the school committee, building committee, should make a motion to rescind the motion made on August 15, 2023, at which time the school committee, building committee, approved a budget number, insert this amount, to submit to the MSBA on behalf of the Whitman Middle School building project. There's one caveat to this advice. If action has already been taken in reliance on the August 15, 2023 motion, the motion cannot be rescinded. For example, if the budget number approved by the committee on August 15, 2023 was submitted to MSBA and they have taken action based on that number, you may not be able to rescind the motion. If, however, no budget number has been submitted to MSBA yet, you can move to rescind the August 15th vote. If you have any questions, let me know. So I don't know if any action has been taken on that vote to MSBA yet.
Mr. Carroll?
So I have informed the MSBA of where we stand and that there was going to be a meeting tonight, and I've actually got a meeting scheduled tomorrow morning with them. So I would say that they have been informed, but no action has been taken. They would not take action until the 31st.
So isn't it true, though, that we already submitted the grade levels 5 through 8 to MSBA? Wasn't that already submitted to them and approved?
That is correct. That was done and accepted at the PSR.
Okay. So that cannot be rescinded, according to what the lawyer said. That part cannot be rescinded anyway.
I don't think that was part of the vote last night. I think in general, the building was part of that vote, but to your point, if you were going to consider something like that, that is a change, then, let me step back. If we were considering reducing the gym size, for example, down to MSBA
That's
standard,
different.
I don't think the MSBA is going to have an issue with that,
Right.
because you're going to their standard. If you were adjusting the grade configuration, we can't just submit that to the MSBA, we would have to have a discussion with them, and they would have to be a partner and a part of that discussion, a part of that decision-making.
And also, that's a vote of the school committee, not this committee. And well, it was voted by this committee, but it went to school committee. So it would have to be rescinded by school committee also.
And I think before you would rescind
Just as
something.
information.
Well, that's the
Yeah, before you rescind
educational
that.
plan.
Yeah,
Okay, the educational plan
For 5 through 8,
for 5 through 8, that was part of the PSR.
right. And it's already submitted,
Okay, and that was submitted.
right.
Okay, the vote last week was the building itself
But it included 5
and
through
the
8.
budget. It was the 5 through 8.
Yeah.
But if you ended up going back in time, you're almost like starting your PSR over again, so to speak, if you made major changes. That's my interpretation.
I would agree with that.
I have a question.
Go right ahead.
So what is the impact of that? Because as you talk about 5 through 8, I'm also thinking about, there were many people in the community when we made this decision to also add an auditorium. So if the situation is something that we're going to discuss, reduction in grade or reduction in square footage or a reduction in something like that, would the educational vision, which included those pieces of 5 through 8 and an auditorium, need then to be stalled, looked at, and then what is the impact to the MSBA on the overall length of the project or the availability of the Whitman-Hanson Regional School District in a project like that?
So I think what we're going to do in item number 1 is we're going to bring forth several options, several items. We try to group them in what we call Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. Tier 1 is basically increasing your risk profile, but not really affecting program, not really affecting operation. Tier 2 is possibly affecting program, possibly affecting operation, and potentially risk. In my opinion, and those are items that you wouldn't have to go back to the MSBA for a reconsideration. Those are changes that are within the MSBA guidelines. When we get into that Tier 3, those are things that we do feel will impact program and could impact operation as well. And that tier is, if we were going into that tier, that's when I think we would need to maybe pause here, have that discussion with the MSBA, bring them in, make sure they're on board with that, and then move forward with something of that nature.
All right, follow up, sir?
Yeah, go ahead.
Would that then affect the overall timeline?
Yeah, so just in general, anything that we're doing in Tier 2 or Tier 3 would probably affect the timeline. That that's a high-level statement, but just in general, I think that's what we would say.
Thank you very much, I appreciate that.
Is that what you
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, so, and how much, by postponing, how much more is that cost added to the cost of the project?
So again, we'll get into that, but the rough order of magnitude that we're looking at is if you assume our construction value today and say a 4% escalation, which 4% is higher than what we would say historic averages, which is closer to 3, but it's probably lower than what we've seen over the last couple of years. So it's a number that is our best estimate right now. That calculates out to about $350,000 a month.
Yeah. I understand there would absolutely be additional costs, but if we were to change the option, and if we were to go forward and reconsider the auditorium, reconsider the wellness center, and reconsider 6 through 8, had we listened to option 1 first, we could have heard that we could save the town up to as much as over $25 million by exploring the 3 options that Mike just outlined to us. So I find it odd that we are asking all of these questions now that are part of option 1. And I would actually make a motion to table this and We actually haven't had a motion to vote yet, so I can't pay it. But, yeah, I mean, it's gonna cost us maybe $500,000 or $600,000 more in design and OPM to possibly save $25 million. That's the DPW building, people, right there, right? More than the DPW building.
Yeah, but you're talking about if we cancel a grade level, if we cancel the auditorium, the gym, which you wanted to go from 6 to the 68, so all that would be, you're talking about, and I would hope that this committee would not go back on every one of those things, knowing the importance to the education of the children of this town is, but that's just me.
Just to address the issue of why are we meeting tonight, if this committee, and I'm late to the game, you folks have been meeting for 3 years on a monthly basis and have put in so much time and effort, but if enough members of this committee left the August 15th meeting not sure that they could support, even though it was a unanimous vote, because the cost went from, we thought, 73 million to 89 million, I think this is the opportunity for those of us who may have left the meeting saying, wow, what did we just do, to be reassured that it's the responsible thing. I mean, we can't walk away from a $45 million state grant to help us build the new building. We can't. We have to fix the middle school, whether it's with the help of the state or not. So we can't risk losing the help of the state by walking away from the project. But we need this committee to be enthusiastically behind whatever it is we end up voting, whether it's what we voted on August 15th or some different version after listening to the options that the consultants have spelled out for us. So I think that it really was in response to several people not consulting with each other, but having a furtive glance at meetings going, what did we just do? So I think, as much as I appreciate all the effort that you've put into this, I think it would be worth listening to the options and maybe being convinced that what we voted on August 15th is what we should continue to vote for.
Yep. Thank you, Kathleen. I think it's important that we're all on the same page, but we got to remember, whatever we decide here tonight, it doesn't really matter what we decide. What matters is what comes in October and November. And, we talk about in option 1 and going through the slides and all that, we're comparing the base repair to where we're at now. Like, it's an either or. Like, oh, we're going to either get the base repair or we're going to get this new building that we've all been working really hard on. That's crazy because, honestly, the base repair is a terrible project to put in front of the voters. That's the worst investment this town could make and the taxpayers could make. So now we're really looking at what we have. You all know when we voted on this, I was against this. But since we all voted on it and we were all in favor of it, I stood behind it and I worked as hard as anybody, maybe even harder. I got involved with the PR, I did videos, I did everything because I knew that the base repair is not an option. And that 73 million was going to be really tough. So I worked real hard to try to get that going. Now I get whacked and now it's 90 or 89 million. In my opinion, that's not going to pass. And base repair, that's not going to pass either. So where are we going to be? We're going to be sitting here with nothing. We're going to be doing year to year, trying to figure out capital expense and put on a new roof and do all that. We need to put forth an option that we're confident that we have a chance to pass. And at 90 million, 89 million, I don't have any more confidence.
Now I'm going to speak. When we made decisions, we made it based upon the numbers we received. And the numbers we received up until the August 15th meeting was a spread of 67 to 72 million. I'll leave off the point, whatever. That's a $5 million difference. I don't know about you guys, but to me, $5 million is a good, strong sum of money when you're talking about the town's share. When it went from 72 something, call it 73 if we want to round up, to 89 million, that's a gigantic, gigantic leap. When I saw the emails coming in and felt that maybe we should take a step back and look, do we have any other options? I can't speak for the taxpayers, I can speak for my household. I believe that we need a new middle school badly, that there realistically is no other option than to have a new middle school. I just want to make sure that we can present something that has a chance to pass the taxpayer. And 89 million is a very, very scary number. Very scary. That's why I wanted to be able to have a complete discussion to know what all of the options are and where we would stand. And I think that's the responsible and prudent thing to do. Barring anything else, I'd like to go on to item number 1 and review what all the options and different tiers are. Mr. Carroll.
All right, so we're going to try and go through all the numbers here at a bit of a higher level. Happy to dive in as much as we need to, so please feel free to raise your hand or interrupt me at any time if there's any questions, anything like that. But we want to talk about where are we now, talk a little bit about how we got here, and then talk about options to move forward. So hopefully that'll work with everybody, but again, happy to get interrupted as we go here. So first and foremost, people are rightfully so talking about the 73 million versus the 98 million. The other numbers that were actually presented back at PSR is the impact on the average taxpayer. And we've actually done the updated impact on the taxpayer. And so what I'd like to actually do is have a little bit of a discussion on that and note that back when we did the PSR, this is actually a page right out of the PSR, the $127 million this year. We indicated at that point that it was going to be an impact on the average taxpayer, the average household, of $99 a month. $99 a month is basically a little under $1,200 per year.
But isn't that... No, go ahead. Like, but the $99 a month in that calculation was based upon the original project, wasn't it?
That's based on the 127 that's right there.
Right, but in other words, what you're doing there is you're taking the average over 30 years, and I'm going to let Mary Beth, she's the numbers person.
So just looking at this, I just want to point out a few things. To borrow 127,400,000 and have a yearly average impact of $1188 for $99 a month, but yet to borrow $135 million for an average of $1,017.53 or $84.79 a month doesn't make sense. How can you possibly borrow $7,000, $8,000, $8 million more and have a payment that's lower if all the factors were the same? So both of those scenarios were based on a 30-year level principal debt schedule at the same interest rate of 5.5%. There is no way you can have a lower per month payment on a project that's $7 million higher. So what I believe you're showing here is the average, which is the average number that I put down the bottom of my schedule, which is not the first number, because when I put this forth at the selectmen's meeting, I wanted to point out to people that the first year's impact on a house for $420,530 is $1,494.01. That's the actual number. The average is $1,017.53. Over the 30 years,
If you keep the house, you live that long, over 30 years, by the end of the debt schedule, that's what your average would be. What you're comparing it to is the average on the right side to the first year actual on the left side. And you have to compare apples to apples. So the first year average, and I think that you just got that from this article on the right, $99 per month times 12 months will give you the $1188. But if you were to compare actual to actual, the delta would be a difference of $306.01. That would be the real difference. And I checked with John Galvin, I checked his work, because based on a calculation he did back in January, February, it was a $73.1 million calculation at 5% for 30 years for the same level principal. And he actually came up with an impact figure of 1145, which would really make the delta not 306.01, but 349.01, not what you're showing here, 170.47. So I think here you're comparing an average debt payment to the first year impact. And we either have to compare first year impact on both or the average on both.
With respect, I wasn't here back then, but the report says it's the approximate increase per month. It is the average. It doesn't say it's the first year. That was the anticipated, that's what was being projected. And 2 weeks ago or a week ago when we met, we weren't discussing $1,017 at that time. There was discussions about $1,400 or $1,500 per month. So you've redone the calculations. I'm confident that your numbers today, the 1,017 are correct. I'm confident that the 89 million is correct. And I think that those are the numbers that we need to work on moving forward. We can look back, the numbers that were reported back then, right, wrong, or otherwise, were what was reported. And it's the 99 and it's the range of 67 to 73.
If you back in, you weren't there.
I was not.
I understand that, but Troy was. So Troy, could you tell us, since I'm pretty sure you guys did this document, where the $99 a month came from and what it represents?
That came from the 1188 number.
No, I'm saying in the budget statement and the PSR back in February that he's referencing the $99 a month in the budget statement. Where did that number come from and how was it calculated?
That came, we don't do budget calculations as far as bonding, et cetera. So that came from the 1188 and the information that was...
Where did the 1188 come from?
The distributed information that...
So who distributed the information? Was
Yourself.
it calculated by Mr. Stanbrook or at that time the town administrator? It was calculated by myself, wasn't it?
Correct, yeah.
And I calculated 1145. And I calculated the first year. So if you look at the document that I created, I specifically said it's the first year impact to the town and then the impact to the average taxpayer, which would have been 1145, and that was the first year payment, not the average payment. So please do not misrepresent calculations that you took from me. You didn't even take it from Mr. Stanbrook, which I believe at the time I said, hey, I'm just the guy calculating this. You really should get the actual information from Mr. Stanbrook. So I agree 100% with what Mary Beth is saying, is that you're totally misrepresenting, taking the average on one side on the right and putting up it against the first year taxpayers' impact on the left and saying that they're apples and apples, because they're not even close.
Yeah, I would just say, with all due respect, there's no intention of misrepresentation whatsoever. Whether it was in the document during PSR, the noted, identified the number, or the 1188. There's no intention of misrepresentation.
It says that preliminary calculations, the impact to the average taxpayer would be an approximate increase of 99 per month. Where does it say that that's the average throughout the whole loan or the average of the first year? It doesn't say that, because that's not what that number was.
But I think it's implied. It says the impact to the average taxpayer.
Right.
It doesn't say the first year impact.
If you look at the document that I created, the document clearly said that it was to the average household, the average, the first payment to the average household. And it was 11:45 what I had, so I don't know where you came up with the.
And if any scenario, if the, if it was misread as average taxpayer or average payment along the course of the bond, then there was no intention of misrepresentation. There was a misinterpretation of what that.
One more question I had. This was done after we selected the options, right? Didn't we select the options in January? And this we did in February. So we're really looking at the information that we were presented in January when we selected option 9B and the misrepresentation or the miscalculation of the town share at that point. So it really has nothing to do with what was in the PSR because we had already decided back in the end of January that we were going to go with 9B. So I think what Mr. Small was implying in his statement earlier was that we made a decision to go with a certain option on a building back in January, and we were given a number of $73 million. And that number has changed dramatically now without the scope of the project changing dramatically. And I think that's where a lot of us are concerned about, is how did this number change so dramatically? When theoretically, we've actually made things smaller in, ineligible square footage and things like that. And how did this number change so dramatically? And who came up with the number of 73 million back in January when we did the option choice?
Sure, yeah, we did as a project team. And during that time, the question was asked, I believe it was you that asked the question, where did the percentage reduction in the reimbursement rate come from? My answer at the time was that we're using historical information based on past projects, which is exactly true, which is exactly how that range of costs came from based on the total construction cost at the time.
Okay, so that's later in the presentation.
Yeah, that's correct. And that's exactly what occurred. That was discussed during the time of decision. And we, as we go through the process, the finances obviously are evolving. We've talked about this many times, many past meetings. Schematic design is when the budget is set. The other information, the other comparable cost information is used just for that, to compare each option based on the information, financial information that we have at the time. That was exactly what occurred. And it's very infrequent, at least in our case, that during PSR, that we go through and provide as much detailed cost information as we did, just because it was anticipated to ask for, rightfully so, as much as possible.
We had a lot of options to choose from.
Yeah, for sure.
We needed as much information as we.
That's right. So we did, and obviously we're making assumptions at time. Everybody was making assumptions with the information that we had at hand. There is no intention whatsoever of misrepresentation. I can't emphasize that enough. And so what we have here is based on our knowledge of the information provided, and this is, the 10/17/53. That is, a lot of detail has gone into that number over the last few weeks since the last meeting. And so that moving forward is what the schematic design, based on the estimates that were identified, that's the number moving forward. And that may change, meaning that may go down depending on what the committee decides. That may stay the same. But as I understand it, when the actual bond is exercised, that's when the actual number is defined. This is providing information, just as we have been the entire duration.
So I just have a question. I guess it's Mary Beth anyway. I have a question about bonding. Does it make a difference the type of bond that you do? You know what I mean, the payback? That's what I mean. So as far as your numbers up here, does that make a difference? Because that's what confuses me a little bit. Because
Yeah, I know there's a level that you go, or it can be decreased. So does that change the numbers here?
Both of those calculations, or John's calculation on the left and mine on the right, were both done level principal, 30 years. Mine was on 5.5. That's what John Steinberg had said at the last meeting, the latest rate that he would estimate, and John based his on 5%. So no, it's not like one was based on a level principal and one was based on a level debt,
Okay, thank you.
or different terms.
Because I was getting confused on that. Thank you.
Did you have something?
Well, do I need that?
Yes, please.
Thank you. No, I was just going to say, just based on face value here, everything that we're talking about right now is an estimate until we actually go out and bond. Also, if this was all based on bonding the money all at once, now more than likely the bonding would be staggered over 2 or 3 years, and then we would have to anticipate what we would think bonds would be like, in 2-3 years. So this is all an estimate, but we want to put out to the taxpayers the most accurate information that we have in order for them to make a good decision here, a sound decision. So on this face value, what just jumped out at me is how is it possible for a project to be $7.5 million or $7+ million more and the payment be less? It just, right from the start, that just jumped off the page to me. So we just wanted to clarify that.
Looking at this, I think it's worse. Now, tell me if I'm wrong, but the schematic design, your numbers, the 101753, that's based upon 89.6 million.
That's based on 90 million, because we wouldn't borrow that odd amount like that, so.
And if we're looking at PSR, that would be based on 73 million, call it 73.1 or whatever. Has anybody backed the numbers into the 73.1 and then done that average the way this is being portrayed? Because I think it would probably be hundreds and hundreds less than the 1017.
But if I can, that's not the numbers that have been out on the street. That's not the numbers that this committee's been talking about. They've been talking about the $99 per month. So I understand that the calculations may have been incorrect back at PSR, but
It wasn't. The calculation, you're misinterpreting what that calculation was.
if 89 million is $1,000, then 73 million would be less than
That's
that.
the year 15 payment. That's not year 1 payment. The year 1 payment is almost $1,500, and that's what's comparable to what's on the left. Because what's on the left is the year 1 payment of the taxpayer.
That may have been what you presented to us, but that's not what went into the report. That's not what we've been discussing.
That is exactly.
I don't know that anyone's been discussing.
You weren't here, so how do you know?
Because I've been listening to you in the last 3 meetings.
I wasn't even here the last 3 meetings. I was only here the last 1 meeting. Okay? So
I mean, you
haven't been
collectively.
listening to me.
I mean, last meeting, we were told it was $1,500,
Let's be
right?
clear. The number on the left is a 5% 30-year bond. That's the first year payment. It is absolutely the first
The
year
number on the
payment.
left is taken from the PSR report.
That was
That may have been
generated by
what
my
your intent
number.
was, but that's not what was actually entered in.
You're misrepresenting the number that I created. So please, Mike, let me tell you, and let's be clear, the number on the left is the first year payment of a $73 million bond at 5% over 30 years. The number on the right is the average of all the payments, which would be technically the year 15 payment of an $80 or $90 million bond at 5.5%. So those two numbers shouldn't even be next to one another.
Correct, it's apples to oranges, correct.
I understand that's where you came with the numbers. That's not what went into the report. That's not what has been,
So there was a mistake made
There was a
going
mistake
into the
made.
report.
correct.
Let's, call it
So,
what it is.
but even as late as last week when we met, we were told it was $1,200 at the 73 million and it was $1,500 at the 90 million. That's the numbers that
So why
were,
isn't the 1,500 number up there? Why are you putting up?
because I went to Mary Beth and she calculated out at the 1,017.
No. I gave you the debt schedule that had the first year payment at $1,494. And matter of fact, you attended the selectmen's
Yeah,
meeting.
absolutely.
So at that selectmen's meeting, I said,
for the $90 million borrowing on a 30-year term, level principal, the first year will be $1494.01. That will decrease over the years, and the average is $1,017.53. I think it's important to give the first year because I took a look at valuations here, and just to put a ballpark, there are some people that are going to see an increase their first year of $2,800 because the increase we're talking about is on a home $420,530. So there are homes lower and there are homes higher. But I put out, and I do have the spreadsheets that I sent you as well, that first year block is
And
there.
we did share that with everybody.
We did, yes, I saw that, the $1494.01. It's important because when people get their bill, they're hearing this $1,017.53. Some people are, the average home is going to open it up and say, for the year, well, it's $1,500. So we just want people to have all the information and make their decision based on accurate, up-to-date information, even though they're estimates, but the best estimates that we can put out at this time.
And I would agree with that 100%. And just so you know, we're not trying to hide anything by not showing. There's so many numbers here, trying to boil it down to a simple comparison. Again, we can disagree on the comparison, but simply the PSR says the average impact, the average impact on the average taxpayer, which we're not taking as the first year. It was the average taxpayer. That's how this slide was created.
Yeah, just a couple questions. So, this is just straight numbers, correct? So it doesn't take into account what the town may do, because if I'm not mistaken, I don't work for the town. I don't think John works for the town. But there are things that the town could do, like isn't the high school going to come off debt at that point? And if so, that could also be applied to lower the payment. Just like we did years ago when we paid out of free cash for 13 years or so for the police department. And the only thing I'm saying is that I'm not even sure who takes the bond out, because it sounds like it's the town of Whitman.
It's the district.
It's a district.
Oh, yeah, that's what I thought, but I just wanted to be sure from what I heard. So what I'm asking is I believe still there are different ways that you, and I'm not a mathematician, I was a history guy. I do believe there are different ways that you can take the loan out. And you could take the loan out at principal payment, I believe, which, yes, would be higher. I asked it last week, and we're back a week later. So I'm going to ask it again, because I just want to know what's... Sure, in a second.
Yep.
So at that point, you can call in a loan at the 10 to 12 year mark, I believe, and you can actually redo the loan, from what I know, and you're probably all smarter than me. You could redo the loan, and then you could actually save money on it, and it would be a lower payment to the taxpayers every year. Now, if you also take what's coming off the high school, you could also do that.
I think the DPW already spent that money.
Oh, see, I don't know that, because I'm just asking.
Well, you were at a town meeting, you were sitting there.
Okay, Fred, and you were right behind me, but I couldn't hear because you kept talking. So what I'm trying to say is all I'm trying to say is, are there different pieces that we haven't explored if we're going down this route? That's all. Just ask.
Okay, so to address a couple of those points, there are different ways in which you can borrow as far as taking a band, taking it all at once, but you don't want to normally borrow all at once and then have the money sitting there if you don't need it. But just let me tell you, the difference between, and it is the district's borrowing, without a doubt, and we pay the district payment. And you're correct that the high school will be falling off the debt schedule. I'm not sure of the year, I don't have that with me. Yeah, that is coming up. But the difference between a level principal debt payment and a level principal or level debt payment. The level principal for $90 million compared to a level debt schedule saves $20 million.
That's
so
over
why,
life, right?
That's over the life.
Right.
Now, as far as you said, call it in and, you could refinance sort of. Usually you can't do that, a call date for the first 10 years or so.
Sure.
Where are rates going to be in 10 years? It may not be that you could refinance at a lower rate. If I had a crystal ball, that would be wonderful. But so we don't know. So every year the FAs go through, I'm sure, the district's debt, the town's debt, and they see if there's anything that's eligible to be refinanced and if it's worth being refinanced. But to count on something like that down the road when we have no idea what rates would be in 10 years, you couldn't even factor that in. But to say, let's take a level debt because the annual payment is more appealing, when in the end we're paying $20 million more in interest, all the borrowings that I've done, we've always done the level principal.
But there are options, I guess. That's
Oh, there are options.
Thank you so much. That's
There
all
are
I have.
options.
Appreciate it.
Any other questions on, so I'm going to ask everyone to understand that the impact numbers are incorrect and would need to be put out in the proper manner, so to speak, as we're considering these. I think a good rule of thumb is you consider the 1188 per year versus 1495?
1494.
And that would be an accurate comparison with the exception of the 1188 is based on 5% as opposed to 5.5%. And the median was based on, you remember?
420 to 530.
That's the current median.
Right, but do you remember what you based your current median when you did it?
I didn't have a current median. I only had the first year.
Home value.
Home value. Just the
Home down,
Yeah.
say fiscal 23, yes.
Okay, so
420, I'm sorry.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
The same, yes, sir.
I just want everyone kosher and understand those numbers. Okay.
Right, so that may be the way it was calculated, but that's not the way it was represented. That's the way it was represented.
Okay, let's not even talk about that anymore, because I'm going to say you're 110% not correct. Okay, and Mr. Carroll, if you were sitting in the meeting and you had direct knowledge, but I know the way Mr. Galvin presented things, and I recall the conversations, and he is 100% accurate first-year payment. So that is what the comparison is. Let's move on.
So looking at the numbers that were presented last week at Selectmen's, we were looking at the base repair at 30 years, which calculated out, again, these are averages in our first year, average 682. And we have the new construction at 1,017. I did go back to Mary Beth and I actually asked her to recalculate the base repair at a 20-year bond. And the concern with that is when you do a new construction building, or if you do an addition or an addition renovation, the goal is that you have a 50-year lifespan on that building. The base repair is not a renovation, it's not a renovation addition, it's actually less than that. It's the base repair, and based off of the calculations that Mary Beth had, she had an addition renovation at 30 years, and we estimated that this would be closer to 25 to 30 years. So at 25 to 30 years, I don't know that you'd be taking out a 30-year bond. I don't know that you'd be able to take out a 30-year bond.
Can you speak to some of the items within the base repair and their shelf life, or, because when you say 20 years, will some of those qualify for 20 years?
Well, as an example, mechanical system usually has a 25-year life. Roof, similar, 25-year life. Electrical systems, a similar time frame. A lot of the building systems that would be installed would be a 20 to 25-year life. And that goes essentially across the board.
Boilers, etc.?
Yeah, you take mechanical systems, whether it's a unit ventilator, boiler, anything like that, usually it's a 20, 25-year life. So that's the reasoning behind the request for the 20-year bond, just because, as Mike said, you likely wouldn't get a bond for 30 years on something that has a lesser
I thought there was some items
duration
included that were 15 years.
So even the base repair, for example, we're not replacing all the windows, right? We're only replacing windows there. So you're not doing a full replacement. You're bringing the building as much up to code as far as energy code as you can, but it's within an existing building. So you're not going to get potentially the insulation level that you would on a full gut renovation or a brand new building. So there's limiting factors to that. So even in the new building, your HVAC system is going to last 20, 25 years. But with preventative maintenance and with standard replacement, you're going to get 50 years out of the overall building. but it's the general building itself is not getting that full structural update, that full envelope update, things of that nature, which is really leading to that 25 to 30 year range on the base renovation.
Now, what about the exterior bricks, the exterior concrete? Does it address any of that?
Any of the spalling, any of the repointing that would need to be done, that was identified within the base repair.
What about the concrete where it heaves, cracks, falls apart, that, we've replaced in the past? I'm just trying to get everyone's understanding, what would a base encompass? Does it address that? Does it address the potholes in the parking lot, the heaves in the parking lot?
No, it does not. So, as one component, I'll make this as simply stated as I can, because the most significant piece of any base repair is twofold. One is you have all of the mechanical systems, all the building systems that have outlived their useful life by many years. The second piece is you trigger ADA compliance and you trigger sprinkler systems, NFPA, fire protection. One at 30%, one at 33%, and those percentages are the assessed building value. Anything over the assessed building value of those thresholds in a 3-year period, which is why we identified a 3-year period, which is the minimum duration, then you trigger full compliance, building and site. What that does, as you all know, there's a lot of ADA compliance issues, whether it's door openings, pole swings, clearances, bathrooms, drinking fountains, you name it. There's ADA issues throughout the building. That has a domino effect where all of the entries to the classrooms need to be reconstructed. Lockers adjacent to it to create those spaces need to be reconstructed. The ceiling, the floors related to that. The bathrooms need to be reconstructed based on the fixture heights, locations. I go into ramps, any stairs. The stairs are too narrow. The handrails, guardrail. It continues to domino effect. Sprinkler system. That essentially means that with the update of the electrical systems, mechanical systems, ceilings need to come down and get reconstructed. The list continues to go on. That's why we're identifying at a minimum a $60 million approximate value for that in a 3-year time frame. If that continues, meaning if the projects don't get completed in a 3-year time frame, then the phasing and the escalation comes into play as well. So that 60 million every year is going to increase as the projects continue to move out. So those are some of the factors that we're talking about with the base repair, which we've this is just a reminder, because obviously we've talked about this way back during PDP.
So it also does not, I think I can see.
Let's go to the
It
next
does
slide.
not include where you're going to put the kids when this is done. So we would have to get portables, and that's not included in the 60 million.
It's a good segue to this slide, which we've also reviewed in the past, a similar slide. That base repair, you're exactly right, that does not change the undersized classrooms. It does not change the fact that you have classrooms without windows. It does not change the educational space for a new building, small group space, project labs, adequate science spaces, and many other components of the educational program. And it's purely code-related upgrades.
But it also is, if you're working on the building, the kids have to be somewhere. So you have to have an alternative place for the children to go to while you're doing because you can't just do it in the summer.
Right.
That's not going to be possible, or weekends. So you're going to have to displace the children and put them somewhere. And so that's another cost to add to me to the 60 million right there. Never mind talking about how many years it takes. And we've all seen, those of us who live in Whitman and Hanson, what happens with portables once you get them?
They stay.
They don't go away. Yeah, so, you know, that's something to be considered too.
I'd like to say that this is the take-home message for me from this meeting. When I left on the 15th, I did catch my breath. There's no discussion among the members of this committee that we need this new middle school. So we're unanimous in supporting the new middle school. But the message that I left, or the misgivings I left with 2 weeks ago was, how can we sell this to the public? This is the take-home message, that it's going to cost me. I have a house that's probably in the average. I'm either going to pay $75 a month for something that I would be embarrassed about and wouldn't want my poor grandchildren attending, or $85 a month for a new school. It's not, and yes, it's 89 million, 90 million, whatever the cost is, but we needed this meeting, at least for me, and I'm sorry to have inconvenienced everyone else, but we needed this meeting, I think, to get members of this committee on board with the cost of the new school. And these 2 pages are the sales pitch. And I don't mean it in a used car salesman's, no offense to used car salesman, sales pitch, but that we need to be able to reassure the public that this is a responsible decision, and that for $75 you get something you will not ever be proud of and you won't want your grandchildren, or me, my great-grandchildren attending, or for $85 a month more, we'll have a school that we can be proud of.
And I just want to correct something, and this bothers me because I was a used car salesman. I work with business managers all over the country, training them how to do things. And to me, if you presented numbers in the way that these are presented, you're doing a disservice to the client. You're not showing them apples and apples. What we should be showing is the first year payment and letting them know it would decline from there. So people are prepared for the impact. That to me, and no offense taken from used car salesmen everywhere, by the way, there are some decent ones to tell the truth. I consider myself among that area. And there are guys that wear the black jackets and the white shoes.
So Fred, we did provide in your packet the detailed breakdown of all 3 of these options, so you can see the payments for every year.
Yep.
But this is apples to apples. This is the average base 30-year, the average base 20-year, the average base.
Someone doesn't care about the average. They care what's it going to cost me when it comes to flood. That's what they care about. And that's what I care about.
That is in the package.
But this is what's here in the presentation and highlighted, and I just wanted to make sure that I made mention of that. I did have Beth and Mary Beth.
Yeah, because it does say average increases over the bond length. So
Correct.
yes, you have to, but I have always said this from the beginning, you are correct, that we have to show what the other option is. If you don't, do you want this or do you want that? And that, I have always said that, so you are correct. And anybody who knows I've talked to them, I have said, we need to show the difference and what you're not going to get if we and we have to do a base repair, because you have to, once the state has gotten their little claws in us, they know what's missing now at that school. So they can start telling us, you have to do these things. And it's not going to be a choice, we have to. So, like you said, are we going to get something that nobody's going to be, that they're going to be embarrassed about? Are we going to get something that's really good? And, the cost amount, and I can say, I'm retired, my husband just gets Social Security, I get a pension, which I didn't get the 80% because I didn't put enough years in. My Social Security is down to about a quarter of what I should get, even though I worked for 25 years. I'm not getting any raises, but I'd rather pay a little bit more and get the best than that. So, as an elder, I feel I can speak to that. And yeah, it's going to be a little tough. I'm not going to say it's not, but I'm willing to do that because I have grandchildren in the system also. And I just feel that that's the right thing to do. I watched kids get hurt with the lockers falling down, and I had to hold the lockers against the top part of the locker against the wall so that they could open the lockers.
Mary Beth?
Okay, so my point here on this slide is the delta per year of 122.87. Looking at this, I think the better way to look at it, I think, would be to compare a 30-year base repair to the 30-year new construction, only because they're both the same term. And that delta would be $335.15, not $122.87. Now, if you look at the 20-year, the difference between the 20 and the 30 is the 74 to the 84. However, after the 20 years, you have another 10 years of $84.79 a month that you don't have on the 20. So it does say compared to the 20-year base repair, Whitman would have a new school for $122.87 more per year for the first 20 years. And then the last 10 years would be $1,017.53 on average a year. So it's not just that $10 a month, it's the $10 a month for the first 20, and then the full $1,017 each year for the remaining 10 years. So it's very important, and I don't see that jumping off the page at me, but I would have, the base repair just for a 30 to 30 to keep it apples to apples. And if you did look at the actual on a 30-year base repair for the first year payment compared to the actual of the first year on the new construction, the delta is really $492.05 a year. So
I would absolutely agree with that, the 30-year versus the 20, but I just caution you that you may not be able to actually do a 30-year on the base repair.
Right, but if you're...
Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
we may be able to do a 25, and then I can run 25 debt schedules. If I just need somebody to say, I asked bond counsel, the town's bond counsel, and they said depends on the DOR, schedule. I looked at the DOR schedule, and a base remodel isn't really an option. There's renos and there's new construction, and this fell into a different category altogether. But if we could get what the real useful life is, and if that is 25, I can run it, see what those numbers look like.
I was just going to say the same, 120 missing payments compared to the American covered.
Yeah. I think if, Mr. Galvin?
So can you go to the next slide? So I think that we all agree that a base repair is not an option that anybody wants to consider. And in fact, even if we end up there, the town's not going to pass that, in my opinion. It's a crazy investment. But we keep making it sound like, it kind of came out over here just now, that this is an either or. We're either going to get the base repair or we're going to get this new construction the way we're at now. And the problem that I have is that I don't think the town's going to vote for either one of those options. And in my opinion, we need to consider an option that we feel that we have a chance at passing. And I don't think that's where we're at right now, okay? And it's not 122 more a month or $10 more a month or whatever it is, because it's a lot more than that because it's 20 years. And again, this is screaming out in big red letters for 122 more a year. That's not the correct number. That number's misleading. It's just, we need to consider an option that's going to pass. Everybody in here wants a new building, okay? But unfortunately, 2 weeks ago, we got slammed with a brick with $16 million more. So we need to step back and say, what is going to pass? I stood here last week and I said, it's an option. The building design as it exists now is incredible. It's awesome. The educational plan that it covers is awesome. But I'm concerned it's not going to get passed, and neither will the base repair. And we're stuck with nothing. We're stuck with zero. No help from MSBA, no new building, and we're trying to figure out what's going forward.
Just one clarification on that, the base repair is no help from the MSBA either.
Yeah, correct. No help.
Just, yeah.
That's the zero.
Couple questions, Mike. I think one of the things that came out from the last meeting was the contingency money. You know, I feel like we didn't talk a lot about that before. Was the last time that we submitted these numbers, January, whatever it was, how much of the contingency money was in there? Do you know?
So, back in January, we didn't have a detailed breakdown. Sorry, I don't think the mic's working yet. We did not have a detailed breakdown of what we call the soft cost. So the hard cost is your construction value, and the soft cost is everything else. So if you look back at the calculations there, the soft cost was basically just a 25% of the hard cost, basically, was calculated. So we didn't say how much of that 25% was designer fee, how much of it was furniture, how much of it was contingency, things of that nature. We just said an average of 25%. So at this point now, we've gone to that next level of detail. We have that level of detail in the documents, and we're able to start breaking that down a lot more definitive on each individual piece and part. And that's, if you remember last time, we were talking, for example, on the furniture, the FF&E, the MSBA has a standard $1,200 per student. We didn't feel that that was enough, so we actually bumped it up. So that when we were doing the 25% back in January and February, that's basically probably including the MSBA 25. It wasn't including that extra over and above it because it was looking at historic data.
So did you, when it says about 7.5 million in contingency, was that added or is that just kind of part of the 25%?
So I think you're jumping ahead here a little bit.
Okay.
I'm happy to answer that now if you want, or I can.
Just quickly, yeah.
So I'm scrolling down just to see the number that you're talking about. So which number are you talking? You're talking on the detail sheet.
Yeah.
The $7.4 million is the current overall contingency value. So that 9% of the construction value, which is roughly 107 million. So I think 107 times the 9%.
I guess part of my question is, did we go from 74 million up to 89 because of some of this contingency money? You know, was that part of it?
Sorry, let me just.
Yeah.
The 9% is the 9. Let me show you. So the current contingency included is 9%, which is the 960. Sorry, I'm just trying to make this so you can see it. The 7 would be reducing it to 7%. So that would be the 7% of the 106.
And that is part, just to answer your question directly, that is part of the increase from PSR to SD is the amount of contingency within the soft cost of the overall total project cost, as well as the construction cost increase.
You mentioned before that most often you give a lot of this contingency, or you give contingency money back at the end of projects.
Most of my projects I've been able to return a reasonably substantial amount of money.
4 million, 5 million, 2 million, I mean, what is it?
I would say, different projects range differently.
Right.
One of the best projects I had, I did a project that was a $10 million job for British Airways, returned $1 million. So that was 10%. So that's more than you have for all of your contingency on this project. But typically, if I look back at my last few schools, it's several $100,000 up to $1 million.
So,
And just so everybody understands, that contingency at 7% versus 9%, I'm jumping ahead here a little bit, but if you ask me what I carried for contingency on projects, say 6 years ago, 7 years ago, prior to COVID, prior to having the uncertainty that we have in the market today, I believe when I did Braintree it was 6.5%. I've seen projects lower than that. I can actually pull up a slide to show you, we took a look at some historic numbers. The bigger the job is, the smaller the contingency it can be because you have a big dollar value there. But many of the projects we're doing right now are at that 8 to 9 to 10%. I do feel 7% is still a reasonable number. It's still reasonably safe, if you will, that we have sufficient contingency there to cover your unforeseens with kind of minimizing that risk. If this committee decided they wanted to go to 6.5% like Braintree was 6 years ago, 5 years ago, if they want to go less, we can certainly do that. But as that number goes down below the 7, your risk goes up.
thank you.
Troy, I don't know if you recall, wasn't this building around 10%?
Wasn't the building around 10%?
Yeah,
What
when
do
you
mean?
built the high school, the contingency.
You're going way back into the coffers there.
I know.
That was 23 years ago?
We were both there.
I don't remember exactly.
I mean, for some reason, 10% kicks me in the head. I'm just, you know, as a rule of thumb.
Yeah, it's, most recently, as Mike just said, even most recently, around 7% is about, owner's contingency, construction contingency is about what our projects on average fall into.
The last project that you did a schematic design, how much was in there for contingency?
I'd have to take a look. It's going to be the average, as I just mentioned, is about 7% owners and.
One concern I have is the soil up there. Once you start digging, you know, as it is today, you still get bottle caps and molasses that comes up through the earth.
So up on the screen there behind you is just, that's some of the projects that we looked at just recently as a comparison to see where we're at. And if you look, the average is 7%. So the lower, or if you look, the organization of this chart is the larger dollar value projects are at the top, and as we go down, the projects get smaller. So it's not surprising that those two projects there, which are the bigger jobs, have smaller percentages. And then you get into the projects that that are more akin to our project size here in that range there.
Into your question specifically, that's the information we provided our projects. Watertown High School, 6.8%. Coakley Middle School, 7.6%. Kennedy Middle School, 5.4%. And Somerset 5.1%.
Do we have a time frame of when those projects were, when the contingency went into those projects? In other words, what year?
So I think these are all active projects right now.
Yeah, they're all Somerset's under construction, Kennedy is finished, Coakley's under construction, Watertown's under construction.
So 3-4 years ago, safe to say?
I'm sorry?
3-4 years ago?
No, some of them less than that, yeah. And it's all percentage of the construction cost.
Right.
So that's the comparison. It's not when it happened, but when the comparison.
And my misunderstanding, I thought we were in a more volatile area right now in needing to carry contingency.
And just as I mentioned, Somerset Middle School is under construction, Coakley Middle School just began construction, as well as Watertown High School just began construction.
Okay, so we don't even know if those were viable at the end of the project.
So, and I can tell you Constantino, Diamond Tech is under construction right now. Constantino is actually about 6 months away from going into construction. So that's a newer project. Their budget was set in probably the height of COVID, if you will. Webster, again, set at the height of COVID. And Crocker just started construction this spring. So again, set right at the beginning of COVID. So those ones that were set more towards the beginning of COVID or into COVID are the ones that seem to be a little bit higher.
None of those have been completed to know if the contingency was sufficient.
Kennedy Middle School at 5.4% was completed about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago.
And do we know at the 5.4 was that sufficient? Was money back?
They actually did some upgrades during that project at the end because they had contingency left over.
So they spent money.
Yeah, they did. Most districts do actually.
How does that work if we come to a number, we lower our contingency, we can't go back to the towns for more money, or the town for more money, can we? I mean, they've already voted, it's already been a project.
I think that's part of the discussion we tried to have last week and maybe didn't do as good a job, is that we're trying to set that number, I'll say, as high as we can to be comfortable with it, but also understanding that there is the vote side that you need a project that you can support. Whatever the number we set today, if you will, if we set a number today, and we go forward with that to the MSBA, that's the highest number the MSBA is ever going to participate in. So if you were to go back later and decide to do something different or just that would go for an increase, it would be all town money. In reality, we're at a point where we're above the cap on most of this anyway, so we're really talking mostly town money. When we get to the discussion about the options here, most of the time, it's almost dollar for dollar what you're cutting, what would be coming back from the town side.
Anyone else? Proceed, sir.
So I think we've talked about the base pier versus new construction enough. Want to talk a little bit about how we got here and what we're looking at going forward. This is a blow-up of part of a graph that we get from the MSBA. This was in your package last time, you saw this before. We're projecting out here with the dotted line that the MSBA cap would not go up. In reality, once we sign our funding agreement, the cap will not go up. So even if the MSBA does make adjustments at a later point, if you sign your agreement, you're locked into that number. And what we'd like to just show is that this orange line is the historic cost. And again, to Fred's point just a minute ago, many of these projects are still ongoing, so that's why this has become a dotted line. It's projecting out based off of budgets and based off of contracts. It's not based off of the final numbers per se, but we're seeing each one of these little boxes, each one of these little squares is a project that's actively going in various stages. And we're seeing where things are being projected out. If I go back to the next slide here, it's actually the same graph, but it's actually going back a little bit further. This is what you'll see if you go to the MSBA website. Just trying to understand how we got to where we're at here. Back when this process was first started, the MSBA cost cap was actually above the cost per square foot for construction. And as things have gone on, you can see for the first few years here, that cap did not go up. And then when it went up, it was trying to keep up with inflation, but it didn't really ever catch up, if you will. And then we hit COVID, and that's when inflation really started taking off, and it's gone substantial. We've added this line in here because there was some question previously about $100 million the legislature has made available. It's basically projects that have signed their funding agreement prior to this date. So though that is not helping us at this point, unfortunately, that $100 million. They haven't really said what, if anything, they're doing to help projects after that line. And so that's where we're at here. So we're looking at a cap here, and our construction value is being projected up here, which is where we're heading for our construction value. We talked about this before. I just touched base on the legislature. We talked last time, interest rates, back in January and February, interest rates were on the climb, and construction was starting to slow down in those markets, especially in the commercial markets, the residential markets. We thought that was going to translate to this market, but it has not as of right now. Those construction prices continue to increase. The other thing that I didn't point out on that last map, because there's all kinds of caps, and Kathleen, we started looking at the 3011. There's caps for the OPM, there's caps for the site work, there's caps for the building, and the OPM and the designer caps have recently really started playing a factor in these as well. And ultimately, just that we're continuing to have those construction costs rise faster than the MSBA cap.
Yeah.
So those caps have been in there all along, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, so, and actually back in December or November, those caps actually went up higher. So it was actually, the cap was 500 for the OPM and designer, and was raised to 550 in November, I believe, by the MSBA.
Correct.
So those caps actually were raised and we were aware of that increase, which actually should have helped us a little bit. We were aware of that at the PSR stage in January and February, that those caps had gone up. Right?
We were, but at that point we weren't calculating off the 3011, we were calculating off of the historic data, which didn't really fully provide that impact.
The other impact in the caps, specifically in the designer and the OPM caps, which was new to me that I discovered 2 weeks ago, was that there was a significant number of ineligible costs in designer and OPM fees because of the auditorium, because of certain things like that. Were those ineligible costs in designer and OPM figured when we were calculating the PSR stage, when we had those numbers back then, or is that something new that got entered into the project in the schematic design stage? And I don't know if I'm explaining myself correctly.
Yeah. No, you're I understand.
I'm just looking at the 3011, and I saw all kinds of designer and OPM costs that became ineligible because of a lot of things that we have in our design that was new to me that would be covered.
Yeah, no, I understand the angle of your question and the intention of your question. And as I mentioned before, the 3011 takes part at this process. We don't have all the information necessary to truly get into detail on the 3011 at PSR stage. What some of the things that we're talking about, the caps are in play, but as the construction cost rises, so do the caps. So do the difference in the cap versus what is realized, right? So not only the 100% construction cost increase, but the difference in the effective cap rates, whether that's site cap, building cap, or the OPM fees, architect fees, designer fees. All of those differences are borne by the district. So that's what's in play as far as looking at the increase from the 73.1 to the 89. And so the detail, driving into the detail, wasn't available at that time. We knew generally what the caps were, but you're going to see, you know, an increase in all of those, which make up that difference of the difference between the PSR and the SD.
Question. Would it be fair to say that if you had done the 3011 or some form that was similar to obtain that data and ran that data roughly before giving us an estimate of a town share, it would have come out to a lot different than the 67 to 73?
No, because we did not have the construction cost changed, right? So that, as I just mentioned, everything else is going to increase similarly or based on the cap difference. And at that point, we didn't have all of the soft cost information. So we couldn't have we could have made assumptions, which we did in a global fashion, but we wouldn't have all the detail. It still could be the same difference between PSR and SD. And as I mentioned, I want to just drive this point home. The budget isn't established, and the maximum MSBA participation and the town participation isn't established until schematic design. We were putting as much information as we could prior to that, based on the information that we had. And so that's, and as I mentioned, it's more than some of the other projects that we have provided, more information that we provided at that stage in the project prior to. So, you know, I know you're trying to understand, right?
Okay, the fact that this committee, or at least myself, you know, made a decision based upon a set of facts and a set of numbers that are so far different right now.
What I would say to that is, or what I will say to that is, just as we had said before, the decision-making information was based on comparative data based on the option. So everybody had the information comparative to each of the options to make the decision, an accurate and informed decision. And that's what occurred.
I don't think anyone can make an accurate and informed decision when there's that much doubt. Personal opinion.
If the committee selected the addition renovation option, that delta, comparatively speaking, would have been similar. Likewise for the 6 through 8 option, comparatively speaking, would be similar. So that's the in any project, public project, MSBA project, all of that information is provided to provide comparative information to make a decision on which option to proceed with.
Curiosity, where were we at the time of PSR, say on the 6 to 8? Just, I'm curious, I'm not saying that this being an option or et cetera, but where were we? Does anyone remember approximately where the 6 through 8 option was for a new school?
We can look.
I think it was somewhere in the 60s, low to mid 60s, I think.
I'm not going to guess. I mean, we go back.
You know, which,
Yeah.
you know, I think if we get further down, you're not that far different on that option. I'm just saying. And that's me. But,
I have a question. Fred, I got a question. This
Go ahead,
is while we're here. So this is the one that really jumped out at me reviewing some of the material. So every town that goes through this process overestimates their reimbursements by about 30%.
No, so what this is saying is, whenever you hear me talk about the MSBA reimbursement, you'll always hear the following: the MSBA reimbursement of the eligible cost. Of the eligible cost. And I'm going to drive that home. It's just going to be part of that. So when the MSBA reimburses you 63%, it's 63% of the eligible cost. And what's happening is, if I can go back to that graph for a minute, back here, way back here, when the orange line was below the green line, all of the costs were eligible. And as this orange line has gotten above the green line, there's a percentage of the costs that are now ineligible because they're above the cap. And as you see here, as we're growing and growing, you know, we're getting to a point where we're approaching 50% of the construction value being ineligible. So we can't even get the 63% of the first half of the second half of the project, if you will. So that's what's happening. So what we're trying to show here is, Troy's mentioned a couple of times, where were we back at PSR? These were the numbers that we were comparing with back at PSR. And what we're saying is that Copley, for example, had an eligible reimbursement of 54%, which actually translates to 30%. So there's a 23% difference there. So looking across the board here at this first group, on average, the reimbursement of eligible versus the reimbursement of actual was about 20% difference. And what we've seen in the last 6 months is that it's actually grown by about 50%. So that's a 30% instead of 20%. So that's what we're seeing, is that as that construction value goes up, the town is being asked, or the districts in general, are being asked to foot more of that bill because of the ineligible values above the cap.
Yeah.
Okay, so just so I want to make sure I understand this correctly, the school's up at the top. So in the middle it says project data available at the time of the PSR estimates. And those are the 5 schools that you use as a comp to come up with our estimate that you use. Now those schools are all further ahead. So those numbers were actual numbers for those schools, correct? Am I correct there, or that?
Yeah, that's correct. Yep.
Actual. Okay, so at that time, back in February, we're in an estimating stage. So we're trying to use those 5 schools as a comp to decide what we're going to use for that actual reimbursement number to come up with at the time, 73 million. Now, if I'm reading this correctly, this is the project data available at the PSR, so that was back in January and February. But you're telling us that you're using the number of 63.3% reimbursement. Now, that tells me that wasn't the number that we had back in January and February. That includes the 6% incentives that we just recently got by working with Mass Save and working with, making the green commitment that we made. Our reimbursement back in January was 57.7%. So that number is not correct. That number is misleading back in January. So if you plug in the 77%, our delta is actually 15.3%. So we start to come off the page a little bit here and say, we're at 15.3 back then, and you're comparing it to the 21.6. Now, obviously, that's an issue there, again, a number that isn't accurate on your presentation, but I want to go to the number that really sticks out at me. And if you look at those 5 top, the actual reimbursement, and again, those are schools that are way ahead of us, so we knew those were actual numbers. The average of those 5 is 26.2%. Yet, for some reason, we came up with a decision that said, oh, we're going to use 42.4% and set it at 73 million. Because that's the number that drove the 73 million from the 127 that we had, that 42%. And that 42% leaps off the page on the average of those other 5 that were supposedly the comp. So to me, it doesn't make any sense how we came up with that 42.4% when the averages were 26.2. So those are 2 different comments there. Neither one of them make any sense to me. Why you're using 63.31 in that graphic when in January we were at 55.
Well, just, sorry, Mr. Gallo, I missed that last part of it, why 22% didn't relate to 42%.
So if you just take the actual reimbursement of the 5 schools that you comp,
Sure.
and you average them out, that average comes to 26.2% of those 5 schools. That's what we're comping. So we're saying these are 5 schools that are similar, and the actual reimbursement that they got is 26.2%. But for some reason, we thought it was a good decision to use 42.44% when we came up with
Unfortunately.
of the 127 million to building to come up with the 73. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Every district starts at, as you know, every district starts at a different starting point.
But
So all we can do,
I
sorry?
mean, they're all there, but you're using a number that we're current at. Back in January, that 63.3% wasn't there. It makes the delta look a whole lot better by using it, but that's not the number that we had back in January. We were at 57.77.
That's the base rate, but also, that's right, the base rate. But neither of these were using the base rate. So in actuality, you are partially correct, where, as I acknowledge here, where 63.31 probably should be 61.5 approximately, because you had 1.5% on the maintenance that we knew about, 2% on the green that we knew about. So whatever that.
The green until very recently. We just voted.
No, 2% was if, and we had identified that way back when, that your maximum rebate, 2% rebate for meeting the MSBA sustainability requirements would give you 2% additional reimbursement points. That's occurred for years, and that was assumed within the increased rate above your base rate. That happens on every project. Just recently, that has increased over the last 2 to 3 months based on their new policy. And that does increase the green reimbursement rate since PSR.
So I guess my biggest confusion is, the actual reimbursement being the 5 school average at 26.2 and.
I'm sorry, where do you get the 26?
If you take these 5 lines, these 5 numbers right here, divide by 5.
Yeah, that's
26.2.
But that's their actual reimbursement rate. It's the difference between the.
But that's what you were trying to estimate. That's what you were trying to decide, what you wanted to get us close to what the reimbursement rate would be, so that you could tell us what the town share might be.
And what we would
have. The number so high that we're all blown away now because it's so much different where we're at.
What we used and what's comparable is the percentage of reduction from their original rate to the actual rate. That's what we used. Because you can't take their adjusted actual reimbursement and average that out, because it's also at a different.
What our actual might be though, correct? Weren't you trying to figure out what you could estimate our, what it might be, so that you could give us that town share number?
But it would be different. But it would be different based on the district and what the actual is, because it would be the difference between their actual and their rate, their original base rate. That's the percentage difference that we're talking about. That would be the, that's what we used, and that would be the comparison. We can't use their actual because it's based on their original, which it could be 80%, it could be 40% original. It's different for everybody. But the difference between them and the average of that is what we used during PSO.
I'd actually like to reframe or refocus the discussion, because what we're really here for tonight is to decide, are we going to stay with the project, given the 3 levels of options or tiers that you gave us, Mike? Are we going to eliminate some of the costs to try to reduce it at the level 1, which is the contingency and some soft costs? Are we going to eliminate the auditorium and downsize the gym? Or are we going to go 6 through 8 versus 5 through 8? So we can go through all sorts of budget discussions and what we should have known, what we wish we knew back in January. That's not going to get us where we need to go tonight, which is what building are we going to support? And I did find the document that has the all of these amazing options: 1, 3A, 7A, 4B, 5B, 8B, and 9B. The costs, and I know it would be scaled up from the 127.5 for option 9B, it's up to 138. Well, the costs for 5 through 8 no auditorium were 122 million, so that would be scaled up. And if we did 6 through 8 with an auditorium, that was 113, and if we did 6 through 8 no auditorium, it's 109. Those costs are going to go up. I don't think any of us has a real finger on the pulse of the voter of Whitman to say this is the break point, that if we go over 109 million, they won't vote for it. I think what the question has to be is, can we justify supporting a building that will meet the needs of our current middle school children and the middle school children going into the next many decades? We can't stay where we are now. There was a lot of misgivings on my part in terms of how did the costs jump so fast. I'm sorry I wasn't in on this sooner in the process, but I know we could go on till midnight and probably not resolve this unless we refocus it. Are we willing to take a hard look at what are our options and what does the majority of the committee want to do? Stay with what we have, cut a few places, level 1, level 2, level 3, which would be disastrous. Now I'm editorializing, but I think I've seen enough numbers to know where I stand on this issue.
Just before we go there, I have one question, Mike, on the total project with soft costs. What was the amount of soft costs? Things that a wish list. I'm not sorry.
Non-eligible.
Non-eligible. No, the fields and everything. I'm sorry.
They're not in there.
Right. That's what I'm saying. If we did those things, that would be, they're not in the number at all.
So I think we had 11 or 12 million dollars of what I'll call alternates that were over and above the number. I don't know, I could pull it up pretty quick here.
I thought it was about 11 as well.
It was 11 to 12 million.
So I'm sorry. So my question is, if we vote the way it is now, that's without any of those alternates. And if we decided to have any of those alternates out of that 11 million, how would those be funded as well? Would that be going back to the town, zero reimbursement? We'd have to come up with that money somehow, on top of what we're talking about today.
So what I would typically say, and every district can do this a little bit differently, but what I typically find is when people have an alternate, such as a field or something like that, what they're hoping to do is carry that alternate through, so on bid day we have an alternate. Now, I was an estimator for a lot of years, and I'll tell you, the more alternates you have, the higher my number goes. So I'm going to caution you about having too many alternates, because it makes me as an estimator feel they're not really certain what they're going to do. There's a little bit of skepticism there, so I'm going to play it safe. But if we were to carry it through, what most districts do is they're hoping on bid day they get a windfall and that the bid comes in substantially under budget, so that they can then afford the alternate within the budget they have established. So that's option 1. Option 2 would be that you decide that you're going to move forward with the fields, for example, either way, or with the solar panels or whatever, and you're either going to value engineer something else out to pay for that and stay on budget, or you would have to increase your budget. Now, if we do that increase after we sign with the MSBA, it's all town share. And if you do it after you have the vote, then you either have to come up with, say, operational money to pay for that, or go back out to the voters to get additional funds. So it's a process there, and really, it's up to you how you would do that.
Right, and I just know that DPW just went out and they came in, when they went out to bid, you know, they were 10% over, so to come in under bid, to me, doesn't seem like that would happen. I'm just worried about those costs down the road as well.
And those costs, for instance, we're gaining the energy grants by making it solar ready. One of the alternates, I think it was $9 million of it, is the solar panels. So as the building would get built, there's no solar panels. When it gets bid, if the contractor wanted to bid it with solar panels and be able to be at our number, hey, great, we get solar panels. Same with the ball fields. Within the scope of the project, there's one ball field identified that is going to be utilized to put earth on and pretty much ruined. So we will replicate that back to original condition, hopefully make it a little bit better softball field, and that's the one Special Olympics uses. The other ball fields are an alternate. There was a concession stand being moved. That's an alternate. So, nothing on there that would be, pressing for the project. They would be nice things to have, but they're not within the scope of the project, so to speak.
Yeah, and those, as we mentioned during the last meeting, I believe, because the question was asked, the order in which those are defined is during the construction document phase. So it would be well into next year before those would have to be defined as which order and then refined as to the exact scope.
All right, so continuing on, if we can speak of the different tiers and options that you presented.
Sure thing. So just, I touched base on this earlier, but we tried to define this as 3 tiers, Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. And in its simplest form, Tier 1 doesn't really substantially change the building. It doesn't affect educational program. It doesn't affect operation of the building, things of that nature. But it does impact your risk profile. We feel that these are increasing your risk profile, but not to a point that I would feel uncomfortable or that AI3 would feel uncomfortable. We think it's potentially appropriate to do. Tier 2 is items that we do feel could impact program and could impact operation, and we can talk about that specifically when we talk about each one. And then Tier 3 is things that there's no question if it will impact, it will impact. It's a matter of how much it will impact. So with that, I was going to pull in and just a couple of points. So as you're going through this, we did provide an Excel file, which was actually a lot more detailed than this. I'm happy to go to that if we need to, but we try to keep it again at a manageable volume of information. As we go through these, anything that affects the building, as far as square footage or cost, we have a net square footage, which is maybe the size of the gym is 800 square feet additional, but we have to times that by 1.49 to get the gross square footage. And then we took that value and times it by $770 per square foot, which is our average cost per square foot. The gym might be a little bit less than that. The auditorium might be a little bit more than that. So there's different things. Without going back to the estimated and actually having detailed documents, that's the best we can do at this point, I think, is using that average number and using that 1.49. And then the other thing I want to mention is that each one of these was done as an individual item. If you wanted to take item 1.1 and 1.3 and add the two numbers, that's going to be pretty close to the number, but what I would probably say is at the end of this meeting, if we have a decision of we want this, this, and this, I'm going to go back and recalculate for those ones specifically and see where it is. It's going to be relatively close to that number, but it may not be exact, again, because that 3011 is pretty complicated. Different caps and different things like that can affect how things work out. All right?
If we could take these 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 3, and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we did here is item 1.1 is adjusting the total contingency down from 9% to 7%, and we did touch base a little bit on that already. Ultimately, that would save $2.1 million on the town share, which we calculate to be on the average, not on the first year, but on the average, about $24 per year for the average taxpayer, and that shows your town savings. So that would be reducing contingency and just basically reducing that rainy day fund, if you will. I can keep going down the list if we want, or how do you want to take them one at a time?
I did have one question.
Yes, sir.
So we have hard costs, soft costs, eligible costs, ineligible costs. When it comes to the project management and the architecture, MSBA has allowable amounts?
So they do. They have a 10% cap on design fees. They have a 3.5% cap on OPM fees, but it's 10 and 3.5 calculated with a maximum building cost of $550 per square foot.
Okay, so how much are you guys carrying in the project, and are you carrying more than what MSBA allots? And if so, what does that calculate to be?
Right now, we're carrying the 10 and 3.5 as budgets. It's
And
not.
how much per square foot?
I'd have to do the math. So our base building was 138,000 square feet. The OPM budget is 3.9, so that's $28 a square foot. And the designer is the 10%. And going on the fly here, that's $76 a square foot.
And what does MSBA allow? Exactly.
3.5% of the overall
Right, so
construction value times 5.
Within your calculations, are we allotting the exact amount that MSBA allows, or do we have costs over that are ineligible?
We're allowing the maximum value as if the construction value was not being capped.
Okay, so then if the construction value is not being capped, at what construction value are we looking at, the 770 per square
No,
foot?
it's not a square foot cost, it's a total cost.
Right.
So we have a total construction value of 106 million. So we're doing 3.5% of the 106 million, and we're doing 10% of the 106 million. And I think the budget that we're carrying in the designer side might be just below that.
Just below.
It's about 9.5%.
So at this point, and this is without negotiating contracts, et cetera, we are carrying what MSBA allows us to carry. We are not over any amounts there.
Correct.
That's
Yeah.
what my question was.
Sorry.
Yeah. Historically, within the average of all OPM designers for projects over the last, I think it documents back to 2014.
So 1.2 FF&E.
So the FF&E, when we talked about this last time, the MSBA allows $1,200 per student for the FF&E, and then they allow an additional $1,200 per student for the technology portion.
Can you explain that furniture, fixtures, and equipment, just for anyone that
Sure.
needs the terminology?
So, yeah, FF&E is furniture, fixtures, and equipment. So that's your desks, your chairs, your tables in the kitchen, in the cafeteria. It's basketballs in the gym. It's all the carts, computers. It can be technology. Sometimes a projector might be in the construction value. It might be in the FF&E. Kind of depends on how we split it up. But all your technology as far as servers and routers and everything like that is all basically built into that value.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Kane, I'm sorry, you've been standing there. Did you?
I can wait until you're done with this.
You sure?
So what we had recommended at the last meeting is the MSBA caps it at $1,200 per student, and what we're seeing is quite a bit more than that. For the entirety of my career working on the MSBA projects, it's been $1,200 per student for each of those. They've never gone up. So I would say up until about 4 years ago, I was able to manage most projects on the furniture side, pretty close to that 1,200, depending on how much you were reusing, things of that nature. The technology was difficult even 4 or 5 years ago. Now through COVID, we're seeing substantial material and prices across the board, especially on wood and metal, even in desks and chairs and stuff like that. So we made a recommendation of going up by 50%. So we're going to $1,800 for the FF&E, for the hard items, and then another $1,800 for the technology side.
And does that include the infrastructure, the wireless hotspots, etc.?
So
or is that separate?
The way I like to say it, and it's not always 100%, but if you were a giant and you picked up the building and you shook it, anything that falls out is FF&E. So the wiring for the hotspots is part of the construction value, but the hotspot itself is part of the technology package.
They put it up good, it won't fall off.
But that's generally, the loose items, if you will. Bookshelves built in would be part of the construction value. Bookshelves out in the middle of like that one would be FF&E. So the risk there, if you went down, is I can say with pretty certain confidence that we're going to be above the $1,200. So you would just start to spend some of your soft cost contingency on that if you went back down.
And the total soft cost contingency?
So right now, if we were to go to 7, right now at 9%, it's 5% of hard costs and 4% soft. At 7, we reduce them down to 4 and 3, so we drop 1%.
So, but as a dollar value, what is that 4 and 3 equal?
Roughly, it's about $1 million per percent.
Okay, so 4 million to 3 million.
The last item we had under Tier 1, item 1.3, it's a reconsideration of the stage. So if you remember, we've talked about ineligible square footages. So what we're saying here is we're not changing the stage at all. We had made a suggestion last time that when we initially submit to the MSBA, we feel that they're going to tell us that the auditorium in its entirety is excluded and is ineligible costs. I've had a situation where that happened, and then we asked them to reconsider on the stage area, and they did reconsider the stage area because they do pay for cafetoriums. We can't guarantee that you would have that happen here, but that's the argument, if you will, that we would make with the MSBA. So this third option is saying we assume we're going to get that money as eligible, and that means that the town share goes down because that eligible square footage. The risk here is that they deem it ineligible. We ask them to reconsider, and they say no, it's still ineligible. Then that would come back to the town side.
Or on contingency.
Well, if it came out of contingency, what it's going to do, one of the things, just so everybody, we're focused on the town share because you're the district, you're the town. When the MSBA designs the 3011 form, and when they design it, they're interested in their share. So they always say this is the total project and this is the maximum grant. Now, we always take that maximum grant and subtract it to let you know what the town share is, but the MSBA is always going to define their maximum grant.
All right. So, and those would be Tier 1 savings that would have minimal impact, just increasing certain risks.
Correct. And I think we're going to talk about schedule maybe in a little bit, but I think just as a preference, we feel that we could make any or all of those changes and still meet the August 31st date. Correct. All right, so Tier 2, eliminate the auditorium and create a cafetorium. So what we've done here is we've taken that 1,600 square foot stage and added it to the cafeteria, so you have a cafetorium, and we've taken the rest of the auditorium square footage out, and we've adjusted that down. It's very easy to say that on a piece of paper, and it's very easy to understand that, but from a design standpoint, there is quite a bit of jockeying. You're not going to just cut off that piece of the building and slap a stage on the end of it.
Right. Thanks, Mayor.
And that would have a direct impact of 8.8 million.
Correct. So that's one, it's $5.1 million on the construction value. There is some soft costs in there, but because of the ineligible, the town savings actually goes up quite a bit from that. Next is to reduce the PE space. So we noted 3,200 square feet. So what we were doing with this is not just the oversized gym, but also the extra area that we've had that we've been looking for to kind of match what you have right now. So that 3,200 square feet is the amount on the space summary that we're over the MSBA allowable. So we can always look at multiple options here, but that's what we did with that.
So that's a 2,000 square feet of the wellness center, 800 of the exercise gymnasium. I think it's like 400 or something in
The storage.
or I think it was office space, because we had 2 office.
Yeah, the storage is down to 2.4. Okay, and that's 4,323,000.
Correct. The next item is reduce the teacher planning area. Again, we're about 340 net square feet over the MSBA allowable, so it would be just adjusting that down. And very similarly on 2.4 is elimination of the outdoor storage, which is 250 square feet. And again, that's the net square feet. Again, we gross those up, calculated on the cost per square foot. And that's what we're seeing with those. So those are very similar options and very similar proportions on those.
All right. Teacher planning, what do they allow? So we're not eliminating teacher planning, we're just reducing the size?
Correct. So I don't know if we would be reducing each office by a little bit, or if you'd be eliminating an office or 2, but that's the details we'd have to work out, I think, through the process.
It's about 340 net square feet.
And that was just a comment that the MSBA had put in the PSR review comments, that they were granting the district a certain amount as eligible, and that 340 that was remaining distributed across the 4 teacher planning spaces that we were owning in the building plans, that would be deemed ineligible.
Okay. And I've got to defer to our educational folks on that. How?
I mean, that's where the teachers are gonna they're gonna photocopy, they're gonna eat their lunch, they're gonna do Zooms, they can't do that stuff in a closet, I think it's worth, to get the building to pass, it's worth entertaining anything, you know what I mean? But those teaching planning areas are,
How much?
they're important. I would have to see how they could redraw them up, but they're important.
Are we talking over 10 rooms, offices?
It's 1 per grade, so grade 5 would have their own, 6, 7, and 8. The way that the building is constructed, you really couldn't share one in a sense, because you couldn't walk the U or the W, or it'd be difficult to go make a copy downstairs and go back up the stairs, you know what I mean? That's why we strategically placed them on each floor, wing for each grade.
So 340 square feet over 3 rooms?
340 total.
Oh, 340 total.
So it's really only like,
So it's about 100 per room.
Yeah.
That's probably doable then? Sure. Probably doable.
I just want everyone to...
I thought it was 340 per planning room. No, okay. That makes
And
sense.
it's overall, so.
Yep.
Any more questions on where we are so far? Outdoor storage.
So the outdoor storage, very similar to teacher planning, it's 250 net square feet, and it would just,
How big is it now?
it's eliminating that in
Completely.
Yes,
Okay, so.
that is the storage. They don't allow for it.
Okay. And what was the intention of storing in outdoor storage?
If you look at it right now, you have the blue garage that's out there right now that stores most of our outdoor equipment, and then you also have a shed that's next to it. And it's basically because students go inside and out, whether it's recess or whether it's physical education materials, all or whether it's when they have track, cross-country or spring track. It's simple storage that we really don't, there's no room for in the building.
The storage is, we need to make sure the town has enough and the school has enough. So there's only a small amount inside, cheerleading mats and all of that. That's kind of where this outside storage came. We're losing some from what we have in the building now to what this is, So with all the towns coming together, it would be hard to lose some storage.
If I could jump in, I don't know about the Whitman Middle School storage, but the chief complaint here in this building from the new build in 2003 is lack of storage in the building. So we are now renting pods outside to put things into. So although storage doesn't seem like a big deal, 20 years from now, it could be a big deal. And that's the major complaint that is in this building right now is lack of storage for stuff. So just keeping that in mind. Seems like not a big deal, but it's a huge deal here. And again, we're looking at pods and different things as education changes, as the building changes, as things change. It was no fault of the committee in 2001, but in 2022, we're looking at renting pods to put things into.
It's funny because an associate or kid that I know was just asking about the big trailers. I Googled it real quick, the little research form. And for 20 grand, you can buy a retired 18-wheeler traveler, trailer. So I don't know, size-wise, is that the same type of size? Obviously you'd want to get something that was cosmetically nice, etc. But I don't know if, we end up saying, hey, maybe that's something as an option, thinking outside the box, that you still have your...
We did that during COVID, and we stored quite a few things. We had, if you remember at that time, 9 trailers outside, and the amount of mold and the amount of weather that hit those when we opened them up 2 years later led to a lot. I'm sure there's different styles that you can get now, but I just think that the storage need is not going to go away, and you hate to, turn away a town or whatever. I think if we're going to get into these pieces, I think there's other issues that we should talk about first before we just talk about storage. If we're really going to take tier 2 down the road a little bit, I just don't know where we're headed.
I just think every dollar,
absolutely,
where I come from, you can't save $1 million before you save one.
I completely agree with you.
Any other questions as to where we are right now? All right, continue on.
The next item, 3.1, targeting construction budget and site work value engineering, $1 million. So I know, somebody might be out there just saying, well, why can't we just, value engineer this? Why can't we just, make a cheaper building or a less expensive building, not cheaper, less expensive building? And I've talked with the design team, and AI3 does very tight documents. That's evident by even at an SD level, which is a very preliminary level, we had 2 estimates that were within 1% of each other. They know how to build these buildings. They know where the low-hanging fruit is, and we've already taken many of those. It's just part of the base design. So if we start going through a value engineering option, I'm sure we could come up with $1 million. We might be able to do more than that. But we put this in tier 3 because we feel that they're not easy options. It's not saying, hey, the bathroom tile is all the way to the ceiling, let's bring it down to 6 feet. It's eliminate the tile in the bathroom or things like that. It's stuff that's going to affect you programmatically, operations-wise, things of that nature. So we put it out there as an option, but we do feel that we'd have to come up with some things. I think AI3 has actually kind of taken a preliminary look at a list of potential items, but we haven't tried to say it's item 7, 12, 14, and 18, and that we have a list of items that we can look at, and we'd have to evaluate that with you. But just telling you that we're looking at that if we're just trying to keep the building as is, but cut a value $1 million out of it, it probably can be done, but there might be some impacts to the operation or to the program. And then the last one we have on there is 3.2, grade configuration from 5 to 8 to 6 to 8. Basically, that makes your enrollment go from 675 down to 515. That's just cutting 25% of the students. And you can see the note there, we assumed basically about 1,900 gross square feet of the building would come off, and that's what these calculations were based off of. Again, very easy to just say, cut 19,000 square feet from a design standpoint to actually do that. Even to say cut, 250 square feet of storage, you can't just have like a missing cube in the building. You've got to kind of redesign the building. So any of those 2 or 3s, any combination, I think that included 2 or 3, we're probably not going to the MSBA on the 31st. We'd have to be looking at an extended schedule on that. Any of these savings have not considered any sort of escalation due to delays or anything like that. So this is straight up the numbers that you would get if you plugged them into a 30-lot, basically.
Anyone have any questions as far as?
I just, first of all, thank you for this, and thank you for everybody's passion that everybody has in this endeavor. When we look at, if we look at 6 to 8, or we look at 5 to 8, I think we also need to know that we took another classroom away from the high school this year for our preschool. Our preschool is outside the doors right now for some of their services, and if you know the high school, there are doors down the end of the hallway. We have no room left there. So when we talk about 6 to 8, 5 to 8, I also think that we have to think about the students who are entering and the students who are coming in and the impact on our preschool. We remember that there was a Park Ave. We sometimes forget that because we always think about what happened in Hanson. But when we look at the impact of preschool and what's happening, 5 to 8 piece also helps alleviate some of that. I know Ms. Stafford talked about pods and whatever they're called, portables, but that is also not only for that, but it might also be what's happening in all of our schools, all of our elementary schools soon.
Mr. King, you've been very patient. Thank you, and I apologize for not seeing you earlier.
No, it's a difficult conversation for sure, and I appreciate all of your patience and authority. Yeah, Sean Kane, Board of Selectmen, Whitman. Just my own due diligence, and this is going to be a difficult question, but what happens if it doesn't pass? If either option doesn't pass, what does it look like as far as the MSBA? Do they simply walk away, or is it some sort of come back to the table in a retry, or is it, what does that actually look like?
So the answer is there's a variety of options there. I had a project that I wasn't involved with a year ago that actually did fail their vote initially. They went to the MSBA, said they want to retry. They didn't really have the get out to vote like you have here in town, but they got the get out to vote. They re-voted 4 months later. It passed, and they're moving forward with their project. So that's one option. I've known other districts that have a failing vote and just say that we don't feel that we can, have anything that the constituents are going to support, and they stop the project. Those are maybe the 2 extremes. Obviously, nobody wants to see the project stop. We want to see the school improved and the town improved. So there's different options there. You can go back and say, we're going to go, we didn't take all the tiers options. We went forward and we failed, and now we want to reconsider something like that. You can have that discussion if you didn't do the grade configuration, for example, and you say we need to go back and we're going to do a vote. One thing I will say is right now, the MSBA has a number of days from when the feasibility agreement is signed until you have to have your funding in place and move forward into your schematic. That date is October 17th, I think. So if we stay on, it's the middle of October. So if we stay on the current schedule, we submit in August for that October 25th date, even though the 25th is slightly afterwards, there's no issues. In talking with the MSBA, if we were to extend and go to a later board meeting, we would have to petition them officially for an extension. Again, I've had that happen before. I had a project that was going out to vote 2 weeks into COVID, and they had to delay the vote and everything for 6 months before they go back to vote. So there's precedence for that. If you're open and honest with the MSBA, they're willing to work with you on that perspective. So they're not looking to boot you out, if you will. They're looking to work with you to make your project succeed.
Moving on. you folks have anything further to add to your presentation? And I do want to make sure the committee has had an opportunity to ask any, questions that they might have.
The only other thing I would add is that we've given you 9 options here. There can be lots of other options if people want to have that discussion, but what we were focusing on is that tier 1 stuff that wouldn't impact. Tier 2, what we really did is we focused on the items that were deemed ineligible spaces from the MSBA. And then tier 3, it was really looking at those more substantial items. So there's certainly lots of other options that we can do, and we're happy to look at anything anybody would like us to.
And just to make very clear, Tier 2 and Tier 3 would delay the submission and delay the board vote in October.
Absolutely.
For sure. Mr. Evans? I was just going to kind of get to that point. So Tier 2 to Tier 3 would delay the vote. It looks like if we were to design the most compliant maximum MSBA reimbursement school, we can shave 25-ish million off the cost. Sacrifice a lot, but what does that add to the cost in the interim by delaying the vote? Are we talking millions of dollars for you guys to redesign a building?
About $400,000 a quarter, depending upon when MSBA would have their follow-up meeting.
If you decided to eliminate the auditorium, eliminate 5th grade, you essentially go back to the beginning schematic design with the MSBA. You would have to, we would definitely, as a collective group, talk with the MSBA about what the next steps are. It would delay the project considerably from there.
Yeah, so I did say that at the very beginning, just to reiterate, let me just jump back up here. Tier 1, I think we can just do and move forward. Tier 2, I think we would want to inform the MSBA, but it's bringing us back to MSBA standards. So I don't think there's a long discussion with the MSBA. It's just letting them know where we're at. Tier 3, the VE, maybe we don't have to go to the MSBA, but the 3.2, the grade configuration, if you were to proceed, if you want to consider that tonight, I would say that we need to have that conversation with the MSBA before you direct the design team to do that adjustment. I think that that's something that, to Troy's point, that might bring us back to the beginning of PSR. They might want us to do a whole process from there on. So we definitely want to bring them in on that.
Yeah, no, I just want to make sure the committee doesn't have anything. Elizabeth?
Elizabeth Dadnall, 316 School Street. It's hard for me to see the numbers from the back, so I am curious to know with Tier 1, I know you said it's not quite as simple as adding all 3 numbers together, but if that gives us a ballpark, can you say what that total cost savings would be with the 7% contingency and the other 2 items?
3.6 million.
3.6. There's so many scenarios here to understand, and you all have been doing work that we don't even know in the community to get us to this point in time. I really think that, you're probably not getting enough thanks from the community, so I'd like to forward a genuine thanks for looking so carefully at this. And I do agree with Mrs. Otina that anyone in this room can't say how likely voters are to pass any given project, any given number, but I do acknowledge that we want to be reasonable and responsible with what we're presenting to the town when they go to vote. I also am really concerned about the timing implications of making any Tier 2 or 3 adjustments to this project. I thought it was a great piece of information to know that there had been a town that failed a vote and then passed a vote 4 months later. That sounds like a less significant delay in process than going Tier 2 or Tier 3. And I think somebody at the beginning of the meeting said that if we're delaying this project, we're probably looking at about a $350,000 a month cost for delay of project. I think we really have to get to the point where we can put together something like Tier 1, even if it's all 3 lines, and let the voters decide. It's not our job in this room, or not your job, to decide what the voters will decide. It's to put together, you know, a responsible and well-thought-out package, and it looks like you're very, very close to being able to do that with Tier 1.
I do want to speak to Tier 1, and this is just my personal opinion. I would be very, very hesitant to turn around and save on contingency as well as the FF&E in the stage. I would prefer us, if we ever did consider option on the Tier 1, to keep the contingency and drop the FF&E as well as the stage, hoping that we're going to get the stage money back and covering ourselves on the FF&E come down the line. So that would be my personal, I mean, I'd love to say, hey, yeah, 3 and change, but, and it's going to be the will of the committee what we do. I just wanted to throw my feeling in on the
So,
on that
to
board.
understand you clearly, go forward with the 2.1, just knowing that we have that. And
Right. So if they're, and then you're basically 14 and change,
right.
you know, you're saving, or 1.4. Keeping the 2 point.
Added the second, third.
In other words, right, so you have that money in contingency should you need it, as opposed to anything else, because I just hate to see us get, if that's what the committee ends up deciding, I'd hate to see us get to a finish line and not be able to afford to give the kids proper desks or the structure that we need.
If I can, just
Sure.
2 points. One is just a clarification on the district that did have the 4-month in the revote. They went back with the same building. They didn't do a redesign in that 4 months. That was basically going back to town meeting, getting the vote back on a new ballot and everything. So
Were they within their 300?
I believe that they had to have an extension. I'd have to double check that, but there was no, that 4 months did not include redesign time. So if we were going down that path and we said we're going to go with option A, whatever option A is, and then we decided option B, I don't know that 4 months is a realistic number there, depending on what that A to B is. There would be redesign potentially here. So I just want to make that clear that time period, that escalation, whether it's after a vote for a revote or it's redesigned now, like that escalation time is real, and that, you know, that clock is ticking on us. And then as far as what you were saying with Fred with the contingencies and the FF&E, I was kind of thinking the same thing. It's not my decision, but I was thinking maybe almost very similar. If you took the contingency out, leave the FF&E in the stage, it's about the same number. But I think that what you said makes a lot of sense.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Are we at a point where someone can make a motion to do exactly what you said, Mr. Small?
Well, the first thing we would need to do would be rescind our vote of the 15th. Someone would like to make a motion, I would entertain that. Before we can consider any other actions, we do have to erase that vote. Otherwise, if that vote is not rescinded,
Why
yes.
would we rescind the vote if the committee decides not to do any of these impacts?
You wouldn't have to.
So why are we going to have a vote before we make a decision on if we're going to implement any of these, if we're willing to implement any of these tiers? I would think we'd want to discuss tiers, and if the committee is unwilling to do anything, we want to keep, you know, if
Right, but before,
1.1, 1.2, 1.3 doesn't change our vote from the 15. 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, those do change the vote.
right, but we can't have a vote to do any of those while we still have an approved submittal that we voted. In other words, you have to get rid of that before you can, we can discuss it.
So then what are we going to do if we decide not to do any of those and we've already rescinded the vote?
So then you vote again to
I don't think you could do that.
do the submittal.
No, you could do that without
Maybe we
any-
can try to reach a consensus before we're getting the
Yeah, that's fine.
Might be the-
That would be fine. You know, that's,
So as a point of discussion, maybe for consensus, I'd like to talk about tier 1 items. If we're in favor of some of that, all of that, or whatever, and then maybe we can go from there. I would be in favor.
Opinions?
I mean, I kind of agree, maybe with what Mike said, though, I was thinking what he said before, you said your point, but yeah, adjust the contingency down to 7%, leave the FF&E and the stage and hope that that comes back to us. Well, but the stage comes back to us later, but work with the average contingency that other towns have been seeing. It ends up being almost the same.
Right,
$100,000,
similar.
but
6 of one, half dozen of the other.
Okay, 1.1.
The other?
Could Mary Beth remind us what just happened with the DPW bids?
Oh, the DPW bids, they're over a total now of, it was a $17.8 million borrowing, and they had $1,098,000 voted the year before. And right now, they're $3.2 million over. And
So that we voted on a number at town meeting, we sent it out to bid.
Right.
Now, in a pretty fast time, actually. I mean, it's only been since May 1st. And we're already $3 million over what town meeting approved. Now, that would be something that a contingency could help out if you had a significant, so if we reduce our contingency, you don't have that to help cover that construction cost. So I would be very concerned to reduce the contingency at all, just because, you look at so many of these schools that have gone out, and so many of them, you look at the news, so many school buildings have gone out, they've approved town meetings, they've gone out and they're tens of millions over, I mean, you brought up Somerset, and I'll bring up Somerset. Somerset got approved, came back, went out to bid, and they were 10 million over. And what did they do? They went back, they didn't redo it.
Meeting. And it's just the Whitman Middle School building committee.
Chris, you're on. We can hear you. Keep talking.
My point is that I would be against.
Can you just say that again? It's 10 million more?
So Somerset approved at town meeting, it's one of the schools that was comped with us. They went out they did their construction, went out for bid, came back $10 million more.
9 million, but yes.
And basically said, what do we do? Now, obviously, we're not going to have $10 million worth of contingency, but that type of issue is happening across many, many school buildings, that they're going out to bid and it's coming back in. And it just happened to the DPW, and we're only 4 months from an approved town meeting there. So I would be concerned in not keeping the maximum contingency that we have in. I would be against changing the FF&E as well. And 1.3 really it really doesn't apply, I don't think, to us, because we're not going to know until after we go to vote. So we're going to have to leave it in there when we go to town meeting, because we're not going to know until after that. I would think, would we know before town meeting that 1.3 got approved by the MSBA?
So that would be, at the board meeting, maybe on the 25th, they would have.
So that would be days before our town meeting. So we would already have the warrant approved and posted, so we couldn't change it. I guess we could change it down if that did happen.
It would be the 654.
So one thing I would say is we could try and, not try, we already intend to reach out to the MSBA tomorrow. And one of the things we can do is ask them to take a look at the 3011 to see, hey, what do you think? And see if they're gonna, I guess the question right now is, we're showing the stage on the 3011 draft as excluded space. So if we were to vote for 1.3, I would then show it as included and try to make the argument before they reject it. Rather than wait until it's rejected and then make the argument, basically.
Then we'd still only get 63% reimbursement on that.
That's correct. And that's what these numbers are showing, yeah.
Okay, that gets the...
Yeah. And just not to get us too into the weeds here, but just so you know, we're talking 9% versus 7 on the contingency, but we do have in the fine print there, hard cost contingency, soft cost contingency. The MSBA treats those as 2 separate buckets. So from that perspective, if you're over on your construction budget, you can take money from the hard costs, and no harm, no foul. If you expended all of that and then go to the soft cost side, you can do that, but again, then it's a town expense, town-only expense, if you will. So I always say, for the most part, the contingency, the MSBA has formulas where they theoretically could help with, paying for some of that, but for the most part, I tell the towns, assume that that's town money, that you're spending your money at that point. So the only reason why I was going with that is, we're saying 9 to 7. You could keep the hard costs at 5 if you wanted, and still reduce the soft cost to 4. Any combination here, really, if you don't like 9 to 7, if you like 9 to 8, or 9 to 7.5, again, there's some options there.
Thank you. All right. Further
Can I ask one more question, maybe for Beth or John? When we talk about these savings of contingencies and things like that, is this kind of like a capital item? When we go to capital, it's like we set it here, but it might only cost here, and the rest of the money isn't spent? You know what I'm saying? Let's take maybe the phone project we had. You know what I mean? Let's say the budget for the phone project on the capital side that we were granted was, I don't know, $300,000. It comes in at $240,000. That $60,000 is never accessed, and it stays. Is this sort of the same?
Yeah, it's never borrowed.
Yeah, is this sort of the same thing we're looking at?
Yeah, but to go, if it's not enough when the bids come in,
Right.
or a condition happens,
Right.
that they need a change order because, they struck something underground or whatever, that's where the money to pay for that would come.
Correct. So I think I'm agreeing with you, Fred, in this, is that if we didn't touch it, but it came in less, like, no harm, no foul. But if we cut it, and it came in more, then we'd be in trouble and have to go back to the town separately.
Right.
Is that where it's sort of, I'm just trying to get it.
That's exactly, so it's our safety net.
Yeah.
Basically, is what it is.
Thank you.
Yes.
Just a point on the DPW, they're over, and they were, talking about going back to the town for $2 million, and the committee wants to move forward with that and meet a joint meeting with the DPW building committee and the selectmen. Of course, I was not in favor of going back to the to the taxpayers for any more money, so they're really working to find that and cut things. Just so you don't think they're going back, for sure.
Yeah.
Because that's never good.
And they're a little bit different because we have to work with MSBA as opposed to, us just being the ultimate decision maker, so to speak, or council. Any further discussion on tier 1 items? Are we at a consensus that we would make some sort of an adjustment on tier 1, keeping the contingency, but perhaps either 1.2 or 1.3 could get dropped, even especially 1.3. Granted, it's not going to make a gigantic difference within the project, but every penny I think is important. And if we ended up having to take the smaller portion out of contingency, it's a smaller portion. And I think it's at the percentages that you have built in, it's still well within the formulas. Tier 2 items. Yeah, it's,
That's not what he said.
It's what Fred said before.
Okay.
And worst case scenario, if FF&E, if we were to remove 1.2, that could be a capital article at a future town meeting to make up the difference for whatever equipment. If we don't borrow the money now, it's $800,000 is equivalent to the playgrounds.
true.
Mike, is that true? If we go out to bid, so if we took the FFE down, say we took it down to what it's supposed to be, and we went out to bid and it came in higher, since we've already approved a certain amount, would we be able to do a separate article at town meeting to pay for that additional? would the MSBA let us do that, or?
So regardless if we're at 1,200 a student or 1,800 a student, we're gonna go out to bid, and that's not gonna be part of the construction bid. We're gonna go out to all kinds of furniture people, WB Masons, people like that, to price up desks and chairs and everything like that, and we're gonna get the numbers in. If we're over budget, then we're gonna come back to the committee and say, we've received the bids and it's $2,000, and I need to take X dollars from soft cost contingency to cover that, or we need to make cuts. So that's all gonna be done within the overall project budget. So I think it's accurate that as long as you have the money left in contingency, now if we've spent all our contingency and now you need to get more money, then there's a discussion of where that money's gonna come from outside the project. Ultimately, if you decided as a committee or as a town or as a district that you're gonna fund that from some different source, then that's always an option.
So we could earmark an article at the future town meeting to say, we're gonna pay for this furniture within.
I mean, at that point, you could raise and appropriate, you could do a capital exclusion, you know, et cetera, too. So, I mean, you would have, you know, some options for the shorter dollar amounts.
I mean, just so everybody understands, the percentages we're talking about here, and I don't want to speak for AI3, but I feel reasonably comfortable with them as my designer, that we're going to have tight documents and we're going to have good bidding, that if you told me tonight that you wanted to take the 7% and the FF&E, I just need to make sure that that's the direction we move forward. If we can take the contingency and not the FF&E, or the FF&E and not the contingency, that gives us a little more flexibility down the line, gives you a little more flexibility. But we're still going to continue to make the drawings as tight as we can.
And we could also decide to go to 8% instead of 7%.
Exactly.
Everybody, I don't know if we want to reach a consensus here or not on, you know, tier 1 items that we feel fairly confident, that don't feel confident that we can figure something out there. You know, it's just a consensus.
So would the consensus be then to take, so if you count that up, it's what, three and change, would the consensus be little, all, half? I just don't know what the consensus we're reaching is for the number.
I mean, if we took it down, if we split it to 8, that's, you know, basically half of 2.1, so $1.5 million. And then if you could even just take the total FF&E, and instead of doing 810, you could do 400. You know, so now you're at $1.5 million. And if you want to be real daring and take the whole 654 off, you know, you could, you know, now you're at a little over 2 million total. I mean, it is, you know, a strong amount. You know, but I dare do not want to get into exact discussion without a motion and a second on the plan, so to speak. But the consensus would be that we could figure something out, I would think. Tier 2. Eliminate the auditorium and create a cafeteria. As stated, this would cause a delay. We'd be looking at if they had a December meeting, which did they ever?
They do have a December meeting right now, yes.
And is that reasonable or unreasonable to think we would have documents ready?
They would be modified documents. We'd have to work with the MSBA to make sure at what level they could be submitted to make the October deadline submission to get on the board of directors meeting in December. And we probably want, tomorrow we've got a conversation with the MSBA, we probably want to make sure that even the district could be placed onto the agenda for the December meeting, because they are certainly tight on the agendas, especially October's.
Yeah, so the MSBA probably wouldn't mind us moving off of October because they've got a lot on their plate. But to Troy's point, we're submitting on August 31st for an October 25th. So if we're meeting December, that means we're still submitting in October, say. So it gives us 6 weeks or so to kind of do what we're talking about. And part of that 6 weeks is the submission, part of that is the estimators, kind of reevaluating the price of the building. So when you start taking the little parts and pieces, it's going to be a challenge for the design team to come forward with a new design without that, yeah. And we are going to be past our feasibility number,
Right.
or date, so we'd have to
We're
ask.
going to have to get an extension, and if we look at it, we're looking at, what'd you say, it's $1 million annually, roughly?
We're saying $350,000 every month.
Every month.
Every month.
So,
That's at 4%. So 4% a year. We're at 106 million, so it's roughly $4 million for the year. It's a little over the year.
so you're looking at, somewhere around 700,000 in
Offsetting costs, right?
Brendan?
I guess auditorium aside, I have a lot of personal feelings about the auditorium. I think it's going to be great for kids in the town. It could be the hub where you guys can vote and do your town meetings and all those wonderful things, The delay gives me a lot of pause, and most likely it could push out to March. I'm assuming you could get your stuff ready, but what about like the teacher planning, reducing that? Is that something that you could do right now to still get in on this? Like, could we save that 90,000 or however much it is? 500,000. Is that something are there other, besides like a big kind of gut in the project, could we do something like that right now? That wouldn't be a huge shift in the educational plan.
Yeah, some of those smaller spaces we could make happen. The PE gymnasium, the auditorium, those aren't small changes.
Right.
That would certainly make for reconfiguration of that entire front section of the building.
So if we got rid of that 340 teacher planning and saved almost 500,000, that would keep us on track for where we are right now.
If I could just pose a question maybe to you on that, or to you collectively. When we're talking about a budget here, we're talking about the upper limit, right? So as we go through, I think Julie just recently shrank the corridor out in the front, and we went from a 1.5% grossing factor down to 1.49. And where I'm going with it is, if you left that teacher planning in tonight to establish your budget, there's nothing telling us tomorrow to not, we can take that 300 square feet out. When we submit the next update, we can just say we've shrunk that space down, and so we don't necessarily, in my opinion, have to rush AI3 to take it out immediately right now, but we can go forward with this as our upper limit, knowing that we're going to be able to reduce that upper limit.
We do have a school committee vote coming up, followed by a selectmen's vote, with specific dates and times, and and timing. And that's going to come into play. So I don't want us to feel, okay, so we're just going to throw it on, but then not have time, because the language has to be pretty much done tonight in order to proceed from that.
So I'm just saying that there's always design development as we go forward, and if that design development included reduction of the teacher planning space, if it included trying to shrink the corridors down a little bit more, things like that, there's always refinement that can be done. And if we have that upper limit, there's nothing saying we can't. We can actually even formally request the MSBA to reduce our budget. Most of the time, as we get into that design development submission and the 60% submission, we don't, but you can if you wanted to.
But we
They're
will
always
still
gonna
have
take
the
less.
ability, because we'll have voted, so the borrowing numbers and the percentages will all be already cast in stone, so to speak.
So, can I have a question? Yeah. So then from what I'm hearing, if we talk about what Brandon just said in tier 2, and we take what some people said in tier 1, we're somewhere in the ballpark of a reduction of $2 million, $2 million-ish. If we split in half, kind of like what Fred said, right? And if we took maybe 400 or 500 from the FE&E, and then if we looked at teacher planning at about 450, you're somewhere in the ballpark of $2 million. So, I guess my question is that something we're gonna move forward with, where you keep what we talked about last week with this understanding, or where does that lie? Like, if you can cut as you move forward, and the general consensus or whatever happens here is that, I guess that's my question. What's the Robert's Rules of Order? Because I get a little nervous on 35-1 for the rescind motion at tiers 2 and 3, because we've already submitted those things with figures to the MSBA.
No, we haven't submitted.
But in PSR, didn't we?
PSR, we submitted the pie in the sky, not realistic numbers that don't exist. I think if we were at those PSR numbers in 67 to 73, I don't think we'd be sitting here right now.
Is that what you felt Andy felt, Jeff?
But I thought the fact that if MSBA acted on that number, we can't rescind that. So if MSBA hasn't acted on that number yet, it can be a rescission. We can rescind.
It has not been submitted yet.
Right. It has to be acted on that number.
And they absolutely have not.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, as we said earlier, you know, every dollar that we can save is an important dollar that we save, and $2 million that you're talking about there is obviously gets, in my opinion, gets us started. It's not going to make an impact in the vote, in my opinion. And I agree that nobody in this room can predict what the voters are going to do. We only have our opinions. And our opinions, in my opinion, is that the voters aren't going to approve either one of these. I threw out a number earlier in this meeting of $25 million. $25 million was 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, 3.1, and 3.2. A little under $25 million. Now, not all of those things, like for example, the PE space, I'd like to keep the 6,800 square foot gym because I think we need it. And so, I mean, I actually came up with 27 million when I added those all together. It would probably extend us 6 months. So at the number that Mike threw out, that's about $2 million additional cost. Plus, I'm expecting that if we were going to redo all of this design, that AI3 and Colliers are going to say, well, there's not enough left in the $850,000 that you appropriated at town meeting 2 years ago. There's going to be additional design costs and additional engineering costs. From what I understand, we'll have about, in the cash flow document that I saw, we'll have about estimated about 166,000 left on 850 that we appropriated. So we'll probably have another, who knows, another million maybe, $1.5 million, $2 million. So let's say $4 million additional cost. That's still saving the town $21 million. And it's also throwing out to the voters a significant amount of goodwill that says, hey, we got these numbers, we went for this, we got to the finish line, and it went up to $89 million. We can do this, we can replace the existing school with the exact same school, 628. Yeah, you're not gonna have a wellness center, but it's gonna be $22 million less than what we're looking at now if we implement. You know, let's throw in the stuff we're talking about, the $2 million that he just mentioned. So we're back up to $23 million that we're gonna save the town. And that's a tremendous amount of goodwill. Who's to say if the voters will even approve that? But I would think that's going to go a long way in convincing them that this committee thought about the seniors, thought about a 26% increase in their taxes if we leave alone, thought about the low-income people who are going to struggle to pay this 26% increase if we leave it as. I'm not going to make a motion on that. I'm just going to make a discussion, leave it out for discussion. But that's where I'm at, and I just don't see that we can keep it as it is, because in my opinion, they're both gonna fail. We're gonna be sitting there with nothing.
Thank you, Mr. Gallen. Anybody else?
I just agree with what John said, and my fear is that it won't pass, come back in 4 months, it won't pass again, and then we're right back here, or where are we then at that point, if it totally fails, so I agree.
I did have one curiosity in Somerset, where it didn't pass the first time. How much did it lose by? When it passed. No, the first time.
It passed.
Okay, which one didn't pass the first time?
That was my project in Webster.
Okay, Webster, I'm sorry.
And I'd have to go back and get you the numbers. I know it passed, or it didn't pass by a slim margin. They felt that if they had gotten the vote, the get out to vote message out a little bit better, that it would have passed, and they did that, and it did pass.
Because I know when Hanson's project failed, they didn't want to try again. It was that far off.
Yeah, so it really depends on how close that is, and then what are you going back? If it was 59, or 49 to 51, maybe you go back without changing the project at all, and you just try and get the, but if it's a substantial difference, then I think you'd want to consider adjustment to the project.
So, can I ask John something? So, just quickly, you ran off some numbers. So, which tiers are you, what are you looking at?
2.1, 2.2, 2.3, 3.1, and 3.2. We come up to about $27 million with the numbers that are on the sheet. But as I mentioned, I'd like to, in 2.2, the PE space, not reduce all 3,200 square feet. I would just take the 2,000 from the wellness center, just because, and maybe we make the gym 7,000 square feet, or somewhere in there to try to save some of that. I just, to me, that's the only way that this is going to get passed. And, a lot of you are going to disagree with me, and a lot of people out there disagree with me. But that's where I stand. I'm going to just lay it right out there. And also, if we did decide to do that, we could use the town meeting scheduled in October to address any additional costs that we may, AI3 or Colliers might put forth to redesign all of this. Because, most likely we have appropriated $850,000 right now to authorize to borrow, and we've borrowed about $500,000. There's, other additional costs and all that. So we're not going to have enough money to pay for all this redesign, but we could use the town meeting scheduled for October to address that, and we'd get honestly, we'd get a good idea where the town is. They could come back and say they're not going to authorize that, and then we're dead in the water there too. But at least we came back with a significantly reduced cost and took care of our due diligence that way.
If we went to town meeting, they'd have to find where the money would come from to raise and
We'd have to
appropriate, or...
I'm assuming we would get an estimate from AI3 and Colliers on if, let's say, we decide to do those 5 items that I talked about, Colliers and AI3 go back and say, all right, we're going to stop. We're going to go all the way back to the PSR stage. We're going to have to redo all the SD schematic design stages. We can't do it for the amount of money that's left in the budget that got appropriated, the 850. It's going to cost an additional $1 million from AI, and I'm just throwing these out here. Whatever.
They'll be much cheaper than that, though.
And then town meeting can then address it then. And like I said, we're going with, say, a $65 million instead of $90 million. And if they're not going to be willing to approve additional design and OPM at that town meeting in October for that reduced amount, we never would have gotten the 90 million. So I would think that they'd have, we'd get a good sign from the town then that they're behind us or not.
And I think we could ban it, correct?
850 is almost what we have for the project, or additional money.
Right, so if the town
We're at
authorized...
So we were at 700 or something now.
Yeah.
So I have to go back and look. But
But if the town authorized us to ban for an additional 300,000, now the only question is, would any of that be reimbursable through the schedule that MSBA has given us? No. Okay. Jeff?
Just a couple of points to consider. Chris, can you hear me? Just making sure you're still there.
I can.
Thanks, Chris. We went out, we made a decision quite a while ago around a 5 through 8 commitment, publicized that through our parent forums, got feedback from parents, and then had the school committee vote on a 5 through 8. If we remove these tier 2 and 3, we blow up the whole project, correct? Pretty much?
Tier 2 doesn't necessarily, but tier 3 absolutely.
Auditorium and grade configuration.
Yes.
Those are the two major adjustments that would require a redesign.
Okay, so we were looking, if this was passed tonight, as it was passed last week, unanimously passed last week, if we stick with that number and we are on target for a project, it would open in September of '27 if we were all clear. Everything goes the way, we get the budget, it's passed. September 27 is our earliest possible opening.
That, I believe, is correct.
Okay.
I think the building could be open in 27, you might still be redoing the
But where
old building.
where I need to place kids.
The building,
Okay.
yeah.
Building, yeah.
If we do a redesign of this project, since we've been doing this since 2018, and with you guys since 2019, it's 2023, what is the earliest I can look at a design project to then come back to this committee for revote? If we were to blow up 2 and 3. So you need to redesign the whole building. When could we have that at the earliest?
So if you had current project opening 2027, building, site would continue for another year. If you just said tonight, or decided ultimately, that it's a 6-8 reconfiguration, it's, that's the biggest adjustment that would go back to schematic design. Then you're looking probably at 6 months roughly, which would put you in a mid-year transition, or you would wait for the following year.
To get it voted by MSBA or?
Oh, I thought you were talking about opening, sorry.
Opening, so we're looking at 2028 or 2029?
2028 winter, 2029, 28, 29 winter, or 29 a year later.
School year.
So it's one school year.
28 fiscal.
Sorry, 27, 28 winter, or 28 September, that one year.
Okay. And if I could just come back, and I'm going to put Mr. Kern on the spot a little bit. As the former building inspector, we had a conversation in 2020, and your concerns about the middle school as a whole still being functioning without significant costs going into it lasting 5 or 6 years. And that was in 2020. So as we start pushing this out further, if the roof goes in 2023, or 2025, and we're in project until 2029, we have some issues there. So again, on your expertise, how can that building sustain until 2029? I thought we could go till 2027 with crossing my fingers, but if we're going out to 2029, if everything goes well, is that building going to?
2028. Calendar year 2028, you're going out one more year. So if you're going to open in 27,
School year
September of
27.
27,
Right.
now it'll be September of 28, or approximately 6 months earlier if you want to do a mid-year transition, like when the kids come back from April vacation, or something of that nature.
Just going educationally, that's not going to happen with a building moving, kids moving into a building.
Right, but that's why we're saying 28, not 29. And, pardon my language, well, I'm not going to say it this way, but we'd be hard pressed if the roof needed to be replaced in 25, whether you were opening in 27 or 28.
That was just a hypothetical, since we have issues there already, and the public knows of our issues. As we continue to push this project out with a significant change, it pushes the the academic standing and the welfare of our kids another couple of years. That's my concern as the superintendent. Something that we've been working on for a while, voted on officially last week unanimously, and now we're reconsidering making a major overhaul for cost. Understand cost. We have to look out 50 years from now and where we're going to be with our students. And the impact of the decisions we make here impacts, again, I'm going to be leaving in a few years and I don't live in town. So I'm just speaking as superintendent of that project, going through a reno or going through a building project that was short-sighted when I was a teacher. People looking back saying, why did that building committee make those decisions, not looking 20 years in the future? That's all I'm saying.
I do have an issue with the roof, who definitely needs to be repaired. There's other things in that building that are very past due repair. And what happens because we spend money to fix the school is we trigger dollar amounts, 30% of the value of the building, then you have to become compliant with the ADA or Architectural Access Board. So what happens is that school is in such need of repair now that we need to spend over 30% of the value of the building. And that will trigger in millions of dollars more maintenance that's going to be required. And then once you get into that, that triggers another major renovation button. The fire department wants the fire alarms and the sprinkler systems all brought up to date. So it's kind of like the domino effect when it comes to that. We need a new school. I think that goes without saying. We're also, part of us, we've all decided as a committee to go this route where we're at. And I think we have to support it and trying to sell it to the town. It's going to cost me a lot more, but I will support the schools. So I think we ought to revote this number. Maybe ask the architects and the project manager to try to get this down by $5 or $6 million without cutting contingencies. I think there's things they can do on their own. We have to be the ones to direct them, let them come up with the ideas. But we need to vote on this. We need to represent this in the town and get it to the voters.
My only question, my question is, even if they got it down 5 to 6, the clock is ticking.
Right.
That's what I'm worried about, that we have to make all these deadlines in order for October to happen. So the school committee has to vote it, has to come to the selectmen, and then we have no later than the 26th of September to get the information to the clerk. So, I'm working on that time.
They need to submit this by Thursday.
Right, the 31st.
Not this time, Fred. They don't need to submit this.
No.
That wording needs to be pretty quickly after that. Doesn't have to be part of that submission, but if we're making changes, there could be some back and forth, and we want to get it back with an approval from the MSBA so that you can bring it to.
So, but we have to vote to submit the schematic design so they can do that by the 31st.
If we're staying on target, correct.
So I was just going to say that I may be assuming, but I don't think you'd want to try a mid-year transition between buildings. So if we are going to move forward, if we were to consider a 6-month redesign, timeline-wise, it almost makes sense to go to the voters with the project, more or less as is now, maybe some of the stuff that doesn't move the October meeting, as Bob said. But if it's rejected, come back and do the deep cuts for, something that is more comparable to the base repair, but much more affordable and gets MSBA money. It's tough to be in this spot now where, you're basically pushing a school year out to do anything other than move forward with the project we have now. So I think that's where we're at. And reconsider if we have to.
Yeah, this is very difficult, and I know it's hard for Jeff to speak because he is a superintendent, but he doesn't live in town. But we also have to look at, from a school perspective, hopefully a school committee perspective, the Whitman-Hanson Regional School District always talks about a similar-like experience for our students, be that whether they live in Whitman, be that whether they live in Hanson. And I will listen to whatever backlog that comes to me, but I do live in this town. So when you talk about a similar-like experience, that is, do the children of Whitman deserve what the children of Hanson have and get? And that is a 5 to 8 education, and that is an auditorium. Now, those things come at a cost. I completely and utterly agree with that. But decisions were made, that's where we're at, And when we talk about what's best for our students, and I brought this up numerous times and I was shot down numerous times, but when we talk about what's best for students from an educational standpoint, I think we owe it to them to have a similar-like experience, put them in the way where they can have the ability to get the same things that other students get in the same district, and then learn to prosper and have what it takes to be young adolescents that might not just be on an athletic field, that might be in an auditorium, or that might be in a 5 to 8, where they go through the gamut of social emotional learning and young adolescents. I don't want to get so caught up, and it's easy for me to say, I don't want to get so caught up in just the number, and I know we have to do that. But we're at this point, I feel like we should ask what everybody else wants. And then, like Justin said, if there's an issue, then we have a built-in already, it's going to be another year, we have a built-in time frame, and we need to do so.
Well, you're also going to have MSBA prove an extension, depending upon how that vote goes. To me, the most important thing is that we pass a middle school project. I do hold it against, Hanson a little bit. If they had built an elementary school when they should have, then 5th grade never would have been moved. I was part of that vote on the school committee. And we would be talking the 6 through 8. So, perhaps with an auditorium, but we'd be talking a 6 through 8. I think the 5 through 8 educationally, and I fought you on it. When I did more and more research, I found that it is of value to the students. I also have found that there are towns that go from 5 through 8 down to 6 through 8. They go backwards. I think that in the future, if we're consolidating a grade, that, it may benefit us to have done that in the future. But do we do that at the expense of being able to pass a project? And that's my big fear. But that's me. This is a committee decision, that the committee's going to decide. I'm sorry. Go ahead, ma'am.
I'm Elaine Bergeron. I live in Whitman. Even though I have gray hair, I'm in favor of a school, but I'd like to see a reasonable school. And I keep hearing we're moving the 5th grade because of an auditorium. Is it only because of an auditorium? Because we have a beautiful one here. We have a beautiful one in the town
It
hall.
is educationally, there are greater opportunities for
But does it matter what building they're in? I'm not trying to be, hard-nosed, but...
I will let our educators more elevated answer that.
Sure.
As
What
far
I'm
as
hearing-
using this,
What I'm hearing about
Yeah.
is that you want an auditorium.
it's difficult for our students, I'm the principal of the middle school there, it's difficult for our students to come here at the end of the day. Transportation is an issue. Scheduling this place is an issue. All of those things. Even using the Hanson Auditorium, transportation is one of the biggest issues there. It's not in our building, in our house, so we've run into multiple stopgaps when it comes to that.
Okay, well, I had also heard that the reason we were moving the 5th grade, and from what I understand, there's no size issues with the current classrooms in Whitman for 5th grade, was because you were concerned about increasing preschool. And I guess my question would that be, is I understand you get funding for preschool, but would you make enough from that funding to offset the fact that you're moving the 5th graders to the middle school? Those were my only 2 points.
Sure, I think you bring up valid points. I think that the town of, the school district of Whitman-Hanson has one school that's 5 to 8, one that isn't. The issue is that now so many students are wanting to come to preschool, or parents are wanting to get there, regardless of what the federal government says, or that we have to. That hasn't come yet, but it probably is that we need to make sure we have a plan. Because just like Beth Stafford talked about portables, if this doesn't go well, if we just do a base repair, we will be looking at portables soon for either preschool at the schools or portables for the current students at the elementary schools because there's no room left. But the fact that we're outgrowing this preschool here is a factor.
I totally understand portables. I graduated from here in 1970. The school was 1962, and it was always a wonder how come it wasn't built properly.
You go to double sessions?
No, I didn't do double sessions, but we had the portables.
And they were removed when this building was built.
I
That's when
understand.
they
And also went to portables and, yeah, 2005.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Galvin?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to implement 2.1.
We need to rescind it.
No, we do not. This is decided. I'd like to make a motion to implement 2.1. 2.2 to only include the 2,000 square feet of the wellness center. To leave the remaining square feet. So instead of 32,000 square feet, have it 2,000 square feet. 2.3, 3.1, and 3.2. I'll second that motion.
Okay, so to recapture, and could you read off the numbers again?
I will. So my motion is to implement 2.1, which eliminates the auditorium, savings of $8.8 million. 2.2, only the 2,000 square feet wellness center, keeping the 6,800 and whatever the other square feet is. That's, who knows what that is. It's 4.3 million in the total amount, but that'll change. 2.3, reduce the teacher planning area. 3.1, target construction, building, and site VE. And 3.2, go to a 6 to 8 enrollment.
Or seconded, correct?
Yes, I have a motion and a second.
Discussion? I would just like somebody to explain to me how that we're not rescinding a vote at 10.0. I understand that it doesn't have, it's not binding with the MSBA, but my question is that this board took a vote last meeting for 10.0, and now we're going to have something that goes against that. I don't know how, under Robert's Rules of Order, you can just arbitrarily overrule that without taking one away first.
I agree. So I'm going to ask Mr. Galvin to withdraw his motion and see if he'd be willing to make a motion to rescind our prior vote. And Josh, will you withdraw your second?
I will withdraw my motion and make a motion to rescind the schematic design approval vote from August 15, 2023.
Do I have a second? Second. So I have a motion and a second to rescind the vote of August 15th to approve the schematic design. Roll call vote. Gary?
Crystal.
Oh, Kristen.
No.
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 No. Yes. Yes.
Yes.
No. Yes.
No.
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 Chris.
No.
All right, so there were 3 yeses, the balance were noes, the motion does not carry.
4 yeses, but.
4.
4?
Yeah, here it goes.
Oh, I got it right here. I'm sorry, I can't count. So based upon that, there's nothing we can do to act on anything else as far as possible impacts. So that schematic design that was approved last week will go forward. And, from there. Next steps and timeline. I'm going to say that you folks will be submitting the schematic design.
Yes, sir.
Will we need to meet in September?
I would say yes.
Yes, definitely.
Yep.
Do we want to come up with a date? Yeah, we're going to get to that in a second. I have next steps and timeline, so I just want to do that.
We have scheduled for the 19th.
Right.
Are we scheduled for the 19th? I know I will not be able to attend on the 19th now. We had scheduled that. Most certainly business can go on without me, or we can entertain to, well, school committee's the 13th, so.
And just as a reminder, the community forum date for September is the 26th.
Is the 26th?
Yeah.
Okay. And that is at the,
At the middle school. Yeah, the middle school.
we do need to get to the senior center with an agenda so that they can prepare something for October. So if somebody could please contact them, Mary over there, and she will get it in the newsletter. And we will have a public forum, probably during the day would be best.
Just as a heads up, that newsletter's prepared for like a month.
That's why I say we've got to get that done by the end of this month for the October, because it goes out in September. So we'll get that done.
Are we still planning on tomorrow open houses for preschool and elementary schools?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
Business as usual.
Yeah.
yeah. You know, nothing.
Right. No, I
nothing
just
to
wanted to
stop
make
us
sure
from
things.
that, as far as that goes. So we'll have 2 more forms. At our next meeting, I do want to come up with a solid open house schedule for the middle school, for, you know, inviting the public and letting them have a walkthrough, you know, for them to see everything, feel, touch, etc., as far as that goes.
So you set a meeting date? Did you say the 19th?
I guess we already had it from last month for the 19th.
I also won't be here, but.
Okay, Kathleen, Chair. That goes. Within our handouts, and we have a redlined, is the latest edition, the language that bond council has drawn up that would be voted on by the school committee at their next meeting, and then within 7 days is sent over to the Board of Selectmen in both towns. Whitman will have it on their agenda, and the Selectmen will vote on that, and that will be placing this article at the special town meeting, as well as scheduling it for the debt exclusion vote. And this will be the language and the sample language for both. So you have the ballot question, the motion, etc. We had a few iterations there. I would entertain a motion to approve this document as presented by bond counsel.
I make that motion?
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, motion and a second.
Question.
Discussion. Yeah.
Okay, so the wording was added,
Yep.
the blue line, and this is the final version that we're looking to vote now. That was added only because it was discussed that the school committee would be meeting last week, which would put the special town meeting beyond the 60-day time frame. So now, when is the school committee meeting next? The 13th.
That puts us within 60 days?
Yes.
Yes, so that puts us within, and I'm just thinking, Mike, you had said if we change things and added language, it could hold things up.
I think so, and again, I'm not an expert on this, but reading what that is, what that language was, if I was on the MSBA side, I would say, well, why do you need that? And I think your answer, you just kind of answered that you don't, because now we're within the 60-day window.
Correct.
So I would recommend taking it out as long as bond counsel is comfortable. You know, I'm not going to, certainly not going to overrule what they recommend by any means.
Yeah, they only recommended that because of our concern with 60 days.
That's correct, and that was the district's bond council. I also checked with our bond
Yeah.
council. And, you know, if the date removed and we're within the 60, then we should be fine. But do we need to fill in here?
I also move that within 7 days from the date of this vote adopted. I think that's part of the boilerplate, isn't it?
No, I'm going back up to the percent.
Yeah, the one thing we're missing is the percentage from the MSBA.
Okay.
Right, in the middle of the document here.
Okay, so I'm going to ask for all motions to be withdrawn in seconds. And let's slow down for a second. Okay, so the district may receive MSA shall not exceed the lesser of what percent and percent of eligible approved project costs? Do we have those numbers or formulate those?
So the MSBA reimbursable percentage is 63.31.
63.31?
They're going to have to confirm that, but that's based off of our base rate of 57.74. We've already confirmed with them our maintenance is 1.57, and right now, with the updated energy, we're projecting 4 points on that, which is 3 points for the energy and 1 point for the indoor air quality.
So both areas would say 63.31%. So eligible. And then striking out the blue language that bond council had placed in. And I also moved that within 7 days of the date filled in, that would be the correct verbiage. I would entertain a motion to approve this document with the provisions of the 63.31% and the removal of the blue line.
I'll make that motion.
Is that just the ballot question?
Yeah,
They don't need to vote on the article.
well, then we should,
Page 2 and page 3, we just need to fill in those.
63.31.
Correct. Both of those.
Last at the ballot, and that just says she would be allowed to borrow. All right, so I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, motion and a second.
Just discussion very quickly.
Sure.
There's a $1 difference between the number in here and the amount that's the reference. Just does it matter?
Rounding up.
I'm rounding up or down. I rounded it to 673.
Okay.
And I think it was 672 in their documents.
Okay,
Just
so
went at the right amount, so it's not.
I'm going to go by your amount.
We're going to say 673. The last three numbers is okay. It's a higher number. Give me $1. Seems to be right. I can make that work.
Historically, the town of Whitman on a warrant would use 2 cents anyway, so they're running out of blue.
All right, so we have motion and a second. Any further discussion? Roll call.
We're voting to approve this.
We're voting to approve the language on the, for the school committee to vote it, go to the board of selectmen for them to vote it, and then ultimately on to the special town meeting and then the ballot.
Okay, yes.
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 Yes. Yes. Yes. Abstain.
Yes.
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 Chris.
Chris?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so, did you get that, Mike? It was unanimous with the exception of Mr. Galvin did abstain. Seeing nothing else to be brought forth? Yes.
I'd like to officially announce my resignation from this committee. I find it difficult for me to volunteer time to something that I'm so strongly opposed to. So I want to thank you all for your efforts and a pleasure working with you all, and best of luck to all of you.
John, I do want to tell you that, at least for me personally, I appreciate everything that you brought to this committee, the time, the effort that you took with all the videoing, everything that you've done, and it is with probably very, very deep regret that I would assume that the committee would be accepting your resignation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Roll call.
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
Okay, unanimous.